Chapter 1422. Shang Zhou said, Konging has already killed or imprisoned the emperors of the inner realm. The people of the Qi accumulation palace will not talk about him, but to find all the emperors, we will need the help of the people of Yuliangism. Infinity 8 Infinity reading Infinity books. O is almost equal to, in fact, the Qi accumulation palace also participated in the fight against the emperors of the inner realm, but Konging was already dead, so it was naturally his responsibility. At this moment, the servant outside said, Palace Master, Emperor Qi of Yuliangism requests an audience. Yang Chuan said calmly, Isn't he here? He said, Please come in for a chat, Emperor Qi. Not long after, Gong Chang's tall figure appeared in the hall. He walked up, bowed to Yang Chuan on the stage, and said, Greetings, Palace Master Yang. He then nodded to Jiang and Shang on both sides, which was considered a greeting. Yang Chuan pointed below, where there was an empty seat, and said, Fellow Taoist Gong, if you are willing, there is a seat for you here. Gong Chang understood that it was time for him to make a choice. Since he was already here, he was already prepared in his heart. Without any hesitation, he said, Since it is Palace Master Yang's kind intention, Chang will accept it. He walked over with large strides and sat down. Yang Chuan watched him sit down, and said, Fellow Taoist Gong, did you return here because of sect leader Kong's summons? Gong Chang replied, My sect has strict rules. Without the order of the sect leader, no one can move freely. Although I heard that there were enemies invading, I did not dare to make a move. After receiving sect leader Kong's order, I came just now. Yang Chuan looked at him and said, Fellow Taoist Gong is indeed a person who abides by the rules. However, I think that the many rules of Yuliangism are somewhat unreasonable. Gong Chang did not reply. Yang Chuan faintly smiled and continued, This time, the cultivators of the 9 continents came to invade. Even Cult Master Kong, who had the ability to transcend the heavens, unfortunately died. With such a formidable enemy outside, how can we cultivate in peace? It's just that the enemy is too powerful. If they can come today, they can also come tomorrow. The only way for us, the sovereigns of our world, is to unite as one. Just now, we have a chance to fight them. Gong Chang sat there and pondered for a moment, then said, Since the cultivators of the 9 continents are extremely difficult to deal with, why not try to negotiate with them? Jiang Kan said coldly, Is Emperor Qi willing to open up a cave abode and allow unrelated people to enter to cultivate? If it were me, I definitely wouldn't be willing. Gong Chang chuckled and said, Chang isn't willing either, but if this irrelevant person's strength isn't bad, Chang doesn't mind paying a small price, just to be safe. Yang Chuan said, That makes sense. Now that Cult Master Kong is dead, what is fellow Taoist Gong's plan? Gong Chang said, With the departure of the Cult Master, the followers of Yuliangism will definitely be in a mess. If we don't deal with it, they might scatter in all directions. Chang needs to go and pacify them. After I've sorted out the secular affairs of the sect, I'll come and pay a visit to Palace Master Yang. Yang Chuan looked at him deeply, but did not disagree. He only said, Since fellow Taoist Gong has something to do, I can't be the bad guy, so I won't keep you here. Gong Chang stood up and bowed. Thank you, Palace Master Yang. After he bowed, he turned around and left. Shang Zhou said, Palace Master, you're letting him go just like that? Yang Chuan said confidently, There's no rush. Now, apart from the Qi accumulation palace, no one can resist the cultivators of the 9 continents. This person will come back. Gong Chang left the Qi accumulation palace and returned to his Dharma carriage. In his heart, he was pondering. Yang Chuan wanted him to join because he valued his personal strength, and also because he wanted him to guard the heaven regions for the Qi accumulation palace to use. Yuliangism previously occupied most of the heaven regions in the Junqin realm that were rich in Ling Qi. Every emperor had their own place to collect Ling Qi. This was something that the Qi accumulation palace could not compare to. However, most of the forces under him were managed by his own family. Many of the heaven regions were controlled by the Gong family. There were too many benefits that he had to protect. If he joined the Qi accumulation palace, he would have to hand over a portion of it. This was something that he was extremely unwilling to do. If the Qi accumulation palace promised not to touch the people under them, he could agree to work for them. Unfortunately, during this visit, Yang Chuan did not mention this. It depends on what Yang Chuan wants. If he speaks nicely, then I'll let it go. I can take a little loss. But if he dares to force me, then I can't. I'll go and rely on the cultivators of the 9 continents. Since he had to rely on others, why couldn't he rely on the cultivators of the 9 continents instead of relying on the Qi accumulation palace? The latter seemed to be a little stronger. Moreover, compared to others, he had one more choice. He was originally from the Green Sky realm, which was the mountain and sea realm. He was not a cultivator of the Junqin realm. Moreover, when he cultivated, he did not need to use Ling Qi. There was no fundamental conflict between him and the cultivators of the 9 continents. As he was thinking, he suddenly felt a familiar divine will. His expression changed and he immediately went to welcome it. In a murky space, he saw a Taoist standing there. The Taoist laughed and said, "Guardian Bei, I knew that you would come to find me." Bei Xiangtong was originally in the left heaven region. Kong Ying had been traveling to the right heaven region. Therefore, although he did not stop along the way, he did not make it to the battle. He asked in a deep voice, "Guardian Gong, what happened to the sect leader?" Gong Chang said, "Why ask when you already know the answer? The sect leader has been defeated by the cultivators of the 9 continents. I saw it with my own eyes." Bei Xiangtong sighed and said, "The death of the sect leader has left behind a mess." Gong Chang chuckled and said, "Isn't that so? Protector Gu, Protector Ming, and even the sect master have perished in this battle. My brother Gong Zhao's whereabouts are unknown as well. Only I and Protector Bei remain in such a large sect. If no one comes out to preside over the overall situation, then the sect master's painstaking efforts will be wasted." Bei Xiangtong looked at him and said, "Could it be that Guardian Gong still wants to support Yuliangism? It's not that I'm trying to scare you, but Yang Chuan may not allow me to do this." Gong Chang said, "I don't want to go against Yang Chuan, but I can't let the Qi accumulation palace get their hands on it so easily. Otherwise, they will not take us seriously. Guardian Bei, have you ever thought that if Yang Chuan gives the birthplace of the pure spirit to someone else, what will you do?" Bei Xiangtong did not say a word. He was not willing to give up the birthplace of the pure spirit, but as Gong Chang said, if the Qi accumulation palace got their hands on it, he may not be able to keep it safe. Gong Chang continued to agitate, "It will be troublesome for me to go against Yang Chuan alone, but if Taoist Bei gets my brother back, we won't have to be afraid of them." There were 4 imperial emperors in the Qi accumulation palace, and if there were 3 of them, even if they could not fight them head-on, it would be enough to threaten the heavens of the Qi accumulation palace, and they would have the confidence to talk terms with Yang Chuan. Bei Xiangtong didn't agree immediately. After a moment of silence, he said, "Then we can discuss this matter again after Guardian Gong finds Guardian Shao." With that, his figure flashed and quickly disappeared without a trace. When Gong Chang left, he also returned his divine will. Although he said it heroically, he also understood that it was difficult for him to do it alone, and he had to rescue Gong Chang. Thinking of this, he gathered many disciples and ordered them to go to the various heavens of Yuliangism to appease the followers. Then, he picked up the jade pot from the table. Not long ago, he had actually found some clues, but this time, because the cultivators of the 9 continents broke through the boundary to attack, he did not dare to go too deep. Now that there were no more external matters to disturb him, he could focus on this. After immersing himself in it for a month, he finally found a little inspiration. His expression brightened, and he thought to himself, "It should be like this." He used his mana, and the jade pot in his hands suddenly disappeared, turning into bursts of spiritual light, and a small realm gate appeared in front of him. He did not step into it immediately, but tried to see if he could sense Gong Zhao's qi dynamic. If the latter was still alive, then when the realm gate opened, he would be able to sense it, and he would be able to find him. However, not long after, his expression changed slightly. He found that the realm gate was actually slowly fading, as if it was going to return to the jade pot. He could not help but frown. This time, he was able to find the entrance gate because he had been deducing for more than 10 years. If he wanted to find it again next time, it would probably take another 10 years, or even longer. It was fine normally, but it was different now. There were still many things in Yuliangism waiting for him to take care of, and Yang Chuan would not allow him to be free for so long. After weighing the pros and cons, he finally felt that he had to go in and explore. Thus, he raised his finger and drew a line, leaving a letter on the table. Then, he stood up from his seat and strode in. Right at the instant he arrived in the pocket dimension, the door behind him suddenly vanished, and he raised his eyes to look. He noticed a Taoist standing there with his back towards him. His pupils couldn't help but focus as he said, "Who are you?" The Taoist did not turn around, but stood there and said, "Taoist friend Gong Chang, I have waited for you for a long time. Gong Xiao did not go out, so I knew you would definitely come to find him. After all, I did not wait for nothing all these years." In a certain heaven region of the Qi accumulation palace, Zhang Yi stood in his own secret room, looking at the two-realm dial in front of him. At this moment, he had already recovered all of his memories, and his cultivation had increased by another level. Kong Ying had been killed, so his mission here was considered complete. He could dissolve his body at any time and wait for the day when he could return to his origin. However, the matter of the Junqian realm had not been completely resolved, so he could still preserve his body. After a long time, there was a spiritual light on the dial, and there was a blurry figure inside. He bowed and said, "Greetings, enlightened Sima." Sima Quan said, "Enlightened Sima is looking for me?" Zhang Yi nodded and said, "When I was about to leave, the dial sent me a letter. It said that I will have to trouble enlightened Sima to stay in Junqian realm for a while longer." Sima Quan bowed and said, "Enlightened Sima is too serious. Sima is like a fish in water here, and my cultivation and magic power have improved greatly. If I go back and sit here all day, it may not be to my liking." This was not a lie. He had the body of a heavenly devil, and the mountain and sea realm had its own rules, so he could not be impudent. In fact, Junqian realm was the most suitable place for him to use his abilities. Zhang Yi smiled and said, "I understand what enlightened Sima means. I will tell my true self about this. However, there is one more thing. After Kong Ying is dead, Yang Chuan will definitely find a way to take over his original power. If enlightened Sima has a way, you can try to stop him." Sima Quan immediately agreed and said, "With Kong Ying's death, the Jade of Knowledge will no longer be of any use. The Jade Liang order is currently in a state of chaos, and even the enlightened master does not speak. I, Sima Quan, intend to take a look around." Chapter 1423. After Sima Quan and Zhang Yi finished their conversation, they noticed that the dual realm ritual dial's spiritual light had dimmed. They knew that it had been used continuously for a short period of time, causing its spiritual vigor to be greatly depleted. Thinking about it, it would probably take another 10 years to send messages to the 9 continents again. Fortunately, Kong Yin was dead, and the Junqian realm would not change much in the next 100 years. Even if something urgent happened, there was still Zhang Yi who could send messages on his behalf. His eyes flashed, and he thought, "What I came down to do is to find a way to make the disciples of Yuliangism work for me." In the past, most of the disciples of Yuliangism had swallowed the knowledge jade. Once he was infected with the demonic poison, he would probably be discovered by Kong Yin, and it would be difficult for him to expand his power. But now, the knowledge jade was useless, and there was no one in the sect who could stop him. If he could incite the majority of the sect to go against the Qi accumulation palace, then even if Yang Chuan could take over the power of Yuliangism in the end, it would take a lot of effort. When the cultivators of the 9 continents broke into the realm, he took advantage of the confusion of the people around him to occupy another body. This person was a cultivator with the surname Huang. His cultivation base and status were not low. After escaping from the morning glow heavenly region, he hit on a remote planet with 2 other true monarchs of the Yuliang cult. After waiting for 3 years, they finally received news that the cultivators of the 9 continents had retreated. After a brief discussion with the 2 perfected monarchs, they boarded the chariot and headed towards the main heaven. On the way, they met a disciple under Gong Chang with the surname Lin. When they learned that this emperor was now in the main heaven, they were relieved. At least, the Yuliangism would not disappear for the time being. On the way, they passed by a damaged formation path, and a perfected monarch suggested to repair it. But under everyone's opposition, the matter was left unsettled. Sima Quan did not join in. He knew that it was impossible to succeed. In the past, the formation path was used to make it easier for Yuliangism to rule over the heavens. But now, it was different. The sect master and 2 emperors had died one after another. How could they still have the power to rule over the world? Even if they repaired it, it would only benefit the Qi accumulation palace. Another 3 years passed, and the group finally returned to the morning luster heavenly region. They stopped at an undamaged planet. However, just as he was about to corrupt the members of the Jade Liang cult, a clone far away in the depths of the void shuddered and came out of its meditative state. It removed a jade pendant from its body. When he looked at it, he saw that it was faintly trembling and emitting a faint spiritual light. He could not help but focus his gaze. This was the jade letter given by Wanderer Rao. Now that there was movement, it was very likely that this person was calling out to him. Ever since Sanren Rao entered the Jade Pot small world, there had been no news of him. However, Gong Xiao had not come out either. Hence, he had no idea what had happened to him. However, from the looks of it, Gong Xiao was still alive. After waiting here for a month, a ray of light descended from the sky. The moment it landed, the entire planet trembled. When the light dissipated, a Taoist walked out. He looked over and smiled. Taoist Quan Ming, seeing you safe and sound, I'm glad. Sima Quan revealed an excited look. Sanren Rao. Although he had a joyous look on his face, his heart shivered. He discovered that Sanren Rao was different from before. Merely from his aura, he was clearly the same person as before. However, he couldn't tell what the difference was. After thinking for a while, he walked up to Sanren Rao and bowed deeply. Fortunately, Sanren Rao is safe and sound. I've been running around all these years, trying to find a way to continue my demonic sect's teachings. However, the All-Heaven Starfield has fallen into the hands of the Yuliang and Qi accumulation families. Even the desolate heaven regions have submitted to us. It's not easy for me to even find a place to stay. It's even more difficult for me to spread my teachings. Sanren Rao, there's a huge change in the world. The leader of Yuliangism, Kong Ying, has been defeated and killed. The powers that were subdued by Yuliangism in the past are all restless. This is an opportunity for my demonic sect to rise. Sanren Rao sighed. It's been hard on all of you. He paused for a moment, then said, I already know about Kong Ying. You're very right. At a time like this, Yuliangism can't even take care of itself. Yang Chuan is busy taking care of the other powers. This is indeed an opportunity for my demonic sect. Sima Quan said regretfully, it's just that we don't know where fellow Taoist Deng is. I've sent him many letters, but I couldn't get in touch with him. Otherwise, we'd have another helping hand. Sanren Rao comforted him. Fellow Taoist Quan Ming, don't worry. The fragrance of true Lord Deng's soul hasn't been extinguished. He's still in this world. He has the jade letter I gave him. It won't be hard to find him. Sima Quan sighed. Then I'm relieved. He thought for a moment and asked, Sanren Rao, how's Gong Xiao? He still had some doubts about how Sanren Rao managed to escape. If the person in front of him was still the same Sanren Rao, once he recognized you as one of his own, he would really treat you as his confidant and wouldn't hide anything. When Sanren Rao heard his question, he sighed. It's a long story. I found my true self in that small world. I borrowed a talisman from that world and was able to subdue Master Shao. But this person is really impressive. I spent more than 10 years and just now barely managed to suppress him. Sima Quan put on a doubtful expression. Found my true self. Sanren Rao laughed at himself. He pointed at himself and said, I thought I understood myself very well. Who would have thought that all of Yuan Ying's previous experiences were instilled into me by someone else? What? Sima Quan was slightly shocked. As a heavenly devil, it was easy for him to change a person's thoughts and memories. But Sanren Rao was an emperor. Once he reached the level of mortal metamorphosis, he could sever past karma and transcend beyond the heavens. Even if someone did something to him, he could still see through it. Unless the person who did it had a very high cultivation base, or they were originally from the same source. When he thought of this, he vaguely guessed something. Sanren Rao continued, back then, Kong Ying and Yang Chuan schemed and used 60 years of effort to set up a great formation to trap the dragon god within it. In the end, they killed him. However, the two of them did not know that long before this, the old dragon knew that he could not break through the world gate. Hence, he used a technique passed down by Lord Yuhu to cut off a strand of his spirit and used his own essence qi to shape his body. In the end, he joined the devil's sect that did not care about one's background. The more Sima Quan listened, the more shocked he became. Sanren Rao was actually a clone of the old dragon. No wonder Sanren Rao could so easily take over the legacy left behind by the old dragon. Not only did he not encounter any trouble, he even knew the location of the hidden items such as the jade pot. It turned out that the dragon god had purposely left these things for his own family. That old dragon was also very powerful. After escaping with his life, not only did he gain freedom, he also managed to get rid of Kong Ying and Yang Chuan. If not for the cultivators of the 9 continents, he might have been able to reap the benefits in the end. He hesitated and asked, then how should I address you as Sanren now? Sanren Rao shook his head and said, fellow Taoists need not worry. I, Rao Jifeng, have been reborn as a human. I am not who I was in the past. I am just now. Do you understand? Sima Quan subconsciously nodded. What he meant was that everything about the old dragon was in the past. The one standing here today was Sanren Rao. Sanren Rao said, fellow Taoist Quan Ming, there is still a long way to go. There are some things I will tell you slowly. Come with me to find true Lord Deng first, then we can plan. Sima Quan, however, showed some hesitation. Sanren Rao looked at him and said, fellow Taoist, do you have anything else to say? Sima Quan bowed with a Dao salute. He said, with Sanren Rao around, the devil's sect's prosperity is just around the corner. But if the cultivators from beyond the heavens come again, how should we deal with them? Sanren Rao said, I already have a plan. When the time is right, I will explain it to you. In the void essence sea, the 9-continent Taoists were sitting on the back of the giant Kun, returning to the mountain and sea realm. At this moment, everyone had their eyes closed and were deep in thought. The battle had been extremely dangerous, but they had survived the changes in Kong Yin's past and future. They had learned a lot, which would be very beneficial to their future cultivation. Zhang Yan was also sitting cross-legged and motionless. If one were to talk about who had gained the most, it would definitely be him. With his cultivation, as long as he did not deliberately forget what he had done, he would not forget what he had done. During the battle with him, Kong Yin had dragged him into the heart-illuminating spirit technique. In the void of the past, he had gained a lot of Kong Yin's experience and memories. When the two of them were fighting, he had no time to look at them carefully. Now that he had settled down, he could observe them from time to time. After an unknown amount of time, he came out of meditation. After adjusting his breathing, he was about to enter meditation again. At this moment, he felt sect leader Qin's divine will coming over. Unconsciously, he had a thought and welcomed the divine will. In an instant, he was in the void of the past. Seeing sect leader Qin standing in front of him, he cupped his hands and said, Sect leader Reverend, did you summon me here for something? Sect leader Qin nodded and said, "Indeed, I have something to discuss with Hall Master Duzhen. Kong Yin has been killed by us, and the remaining people are no longer a concern. Within 100 years, we should be able to solve this matter. However, the Junchen realm is vast, and there are countless cultivators in it. Even if I get rid of all the monarchs in this realm, as long as the legacy is not lost, there will still be people who can reach this realm. Hall Master Duzhen, how do you think we should treat this generation?" The Junchen realm had a deep foundation and abundant spiritual opportunity. Within the vast void, who knew how many sects had left their Tao legacies behind? Unless all the people in this realm were killed, it would be impossible to stop this matter. Furthermore, the Junchen realm still had a large amount of pure purple spiritual opportunity that could be harvested. Such an important thing, the cultivators of the 9 continents would definitely not give up on it. In the future, the two realms would inevitably have to deal with each other. Zhang Yan thought for a long time and said, the Junchen realm still has enough pure purple spiritual opportunity. Even if we spend 10,000 years, it will still be difficult to harvest all of it. If we do not allow this cultivator to harvest it, there will be endless disputes. Furthermore, there are so many talented people in this realm. It would be a pity to give them up. In my opinion, why don't we give them 1 or 2 summoning talismans so that they can compete with each other? The winner can come to our mountain and sea realm to cultivate. Sect leader Qin smiled and said, "This is an imitation of the great realm." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "That is correct. If this matter succeeds, the mountain and sea realm will become a great realm, and the Junchen realm will be our lower realm." As for whether this would attract the attention of the great demon Tru Yang, after seeing Kong Yin's divine ability to look into the past, he understood that if such an almighty being entered the Junchen realm, then the existence of the mountain and sea realm would not be able to hide. Fortunately, for the 9 continents, they still had enough time to prepare. After 10,000 years, they might be able to fight against the great demon Tru Yang. Chapter 1424. Mountain and Sea Realm, Floating Heavenly Palace. Inside the main hall, Qi Yuntian was sitting behind a table, flipping through scrolls. Hundreds and thousands of jade scrolls were flying around him. Every moment, a scroll would fall, which would be carefully caught by a half-foot-tall child. Then, he would hand it over to the guard outside the hall and send it out. Qinsang's school now occupied thousands of times more land than before, and it was still expanding to the north. As the territory expanded, so did the number of disciples. Naturally, the number of things he had to deal with every day had increased. However, as the person in charge of the overall situation, the most important responsibility was to be in charge of the distribution of the various cultivation items. As long as this matter was done well, the 4 sides of the mountain would be balanced and smooth. Outside the hall, a disciple walked in, bowed from afar, and said, "Hall Master, Jinren Zhu requests an audience." Qi Yuntian did not raise his head, and said, "Summon him up." Not long after, a tall and beautiful young cultivator walked in, kowtowed, and said, "Disciple Zhu Yi greets Master." Qi Yuntian said, "Stand up and talk." He put down the scroll in his hand, and looked over, "Is there anything I can help you with?" Zhu Yi said respectfully, "Master, there is some progress on the planted spirit shell." He took out a jade box, and said, "Master, please take a look." Qi Yuntian waved his hand, and the jade box came to him. He opened the top cover, and saw 20 pieces of shell neatly placed inside. They were as thin as cicada wings, and sparkled like snow. They looked like they were between plants and living creatures. He picked one up, and with just a thought, it turned into a pure spiritual vigor and was absorbed into his Dharma body. He said, "Is this the blood jade spirit shell that you mentioned?" Zhu Yi said, "Yes." This item varies from person to person. Sensing spiritual vigor will turn into pure spiritual vigor, sensing blood qi will give birth to blood power. With this item, you will no longer need to take blood medicine when exchanging with the 4 regions. In the countries of the eastern wilderness, most of the people at the lower levels used barter, and most of the places used gold and bronze. Among the mystic cultivators, blood medicine was the most expensive. After the 9 continents destroyed the Ming clan and subdued the heavenly ghost tribe, they had obtained quite a few of these things. However, after so many years, it was about to be used up. Although he could order the heavenly ghost tribe that had surrendered to him to continue to collect more, because the cultivators of the 9 continents absorbed the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, the blood medicine was not of much use to them. Therefore, they could only use it to exchange with the 100 countries of the eastern wasteland and even the foreign tribes. In the eyes of many sects, these blood medicines were always obtained for free. Even if they were used up, they only needed to inform the sect and there would be heavenly ghost servants to refine more for them. Thus, they did not take it seriously. However, Zhu Yi didn't share the same sentiments. Virtually all of the surrendered outsider tribes were refining bloodstones. As far as he was concerned, the 9 continents were expending a great deal of manpower and resources, only to gain very little in the end. In fact, the mountain and sea realm savages were the ones benefiting the most. That was why, 10 years ago, he had asked Qi Yuntian for permission to plant spirit shells in order to change the situation. After looking at it, Qi Yuntian ordered an attendant in the hall, go down and summon a spirit guardian bird that cultivates in the qi and blood magic. The attendant responded, walked out of the main hall, and blew the jade whistle. Not long after, a green-eyed white eagle flew over, landed on the ground, and turned into a handsome boy. He bowed and said, "May I ask what instructions Master has for me?" The attendant said, "Follow me into the hall." As the spirit guardian bird, he was responsible for guarding the floating heavenly palace every day. He knew the rules here, so he didn't dare to look up. He just knelt on the ground and waited for orders. After a while, he heard someone say, "Pick this up." After a while, he heard a voice from above, "Pick this up." He raised his eyes slightly and saw something slowly falling down from above. It was a few pieces of jade shells and he went forward to catch it. The moment it entered his hand, he saw a thread of blood twisting in the shell. After a few breaths, the entire shell turned scarlet red, completely becoming a blood shell. He couldn't help but be startled. Zhu Yi said from the side, "You can try to refine it." White Eagle Boy hesitated for a while. Seeing that there were no other sounds in the hall, he activated his qi and blood force. After a while, the blood shell turned into blood qi and integrated into his body. He felt that his qi and blood qi had a slight improvement, as if he had swallowed blood medicine in the past. Zhu Yi smiled and bowed to the top again. He said, "Master, these blood shells are divided into 5 grades. The higher the grade, the more qi and spiritual vigor it can contain. This jade shell in front of me is of the 3rd grade. If it's the 1st grade spirit shell, Yuanying cultivators can also enjoy it." Qi Yuntian saw it and asked, "How many shell farms have you opened up?" Zhu Yi replied, "There are 9 shell farms along the East Sea coast. They can collect more than 200,000 blood jade shells every month. However, as long as there is enough spiritual vigor and blood qi to irrigate, they can be produced continuously. We only lack manpower now." Qi Yuntian nodded and said, "You've really put in a lot of effort." Zhu Yi bowed and said, "I don't dare to take credit for it. It's because of the cooperation of fellow Taoists from Clear Feather sect and a few senior brothers who inherited from Taihao school. Just now, I can plant them." Qi Yuntian waved his sleeves and a talisman fell down. He said, "I'll transfer 20 heavenly ghost tribes with a population of 10 million to you. Open up another 1,000 shell farms along the coast. If you do this well, I'll record it as a merit for you." Zhu Yi said happily, "Thank you, Master." At this moment, there was a sound of footsteps outside the hall. He looked back and saw a strong cultivator striding in. His expression turned solemn. He bowed and said, "Greetings, big senior brother." Guan Yingyue nodded to him and then bowed to the seat. He said with a slightly excited tone, "Master, just now, there's a movement on the Tongtian Gui, and it's a message of victory." Hearing this, Qi Yuntian's expression didn't change at all. He asked in a deep voice, "Can you confirm that it's from the 9 continents?" Guan Yingyue said, "I've checked repeatedly." The message sent by the spiritual message was indeed set by the sect master. Even if someone else obtained the Tongtian Gui, it's impossible for them to know about the change. Qi Yuntian nodded. Since it was a message of victory, the result of this battle seemed to be without a doubt. However, as the person in charge, with thousands of disciples behind him, he wouldn't let his guard down just because of this. He thought for a moment and said, although there's a movement on the Tongtian Gui, it'll be at least a few years before the Venerable Ones return. Inform this matter to the Zenrins of the various mansions and order them to restrain their disciples and prepare to welcome them. But remember, don't let your guard down. If there's any change in the situation, you can escape as soon as possible. Guan Yingyue solemnly said yes, bowed again, and went down to pass on the order. In the clear blue sky, Lu Yenny wore a plain white dress and tied her hair with a silver ring. She sat on a praying mat and smoke curled up from the incense burner in front of her. The clear and gentle water vapor around her rose and fell, running back and forth. There was a sound in the air, like water hitting a stone. At this moment, a supreme sky gui that was placed beside her suddenly shone with a bright light and rose to a height of 10 feet. She opened her eyes wide and thought happily, could it be that Master has sent a message back? She pressed her slender hand, and after a moment, she confirmed that it was indeed from her teacher. Teacher will come in a few years, I'll tell this news to the junior brothers first. Out of thin air, she condensed 4 flying letters with a few illusory points. With just a press, they turned into spiritual lights and flew in different directions. At this moment, not only Qinsang School, Shaoqing Sect, the 6 sects of Ling Sect also received the message that Zhu Zhen's trip was successful and that he would be returning soon. Once this news spread, the haze that had been pressing on the heads of the various sects since the Zhen's expedition to Junqian world disappeared. After waiting for 3 years, the heaven and earth suddenly shook. Then, the heaven and earth gate opened with a loud bang, and 3 majestic clear lights penetrated into the heaven and earth gate from the outer world. Then, they landed in the sky, and when the lights dispersed, Meng Zhida, Ying Chuanqiu, and Xue Dingyuan walked out. The 3 of them had low cultivation, so they first entered the world to appease the various sections. If they had come with big kun, it would probably take a few more years. The 3 of them bowed to each other in the sky and after a few words, they went their separate ways and headed towards their own sections. After Qi Yuntian sensed Taoist Meng's Qi activity, he ordered a group of people from the heavenly abode to wait in the sect while he brought the protectors of the upper extreme hall, LV Junyang and Qin Nan out of the upper extreme hall and rode the palace city towards Tianzhong. Not long after, he saw water vapor surging in front of him and rumbling like the Milky Way rushing over. He knew that his teacher had arrived and went forward to welcome him. He bowed from afar and said, "Disciple greets teacher." The water suddenly stopped and Meng Zhen appeared in front of him. He said, "Disciple, you may rise." After the greeting, the 3 of them welcomed Meng Zhen into the palace. When they were seated, Qi Yuntian asked, "Teacher, when will Sect Master Spiritual Master and the other spiritual masters return?" Meng Zhen said, "You don't have to worry. Even though this battle was dangerous, it was fortunate that the arrangements were made beforehand and no one died. Sect Master Spiritual Master, Sect Master Yu, and Hall Master Du Zhen all have profound cultivation. It will take a long time to pass through the realm pass and they will only return a few years later." Qi Yuntian said, "So, the Junqian realm is no longer a threat to me?" Meng Zhen stroked his beard and said, "It's not wrong to say that. That Yuliangism cult master has been killed by us. Even though there are still a few imperial emperors left, the strength of the 9 continents is enough to suppress them. We just need to wait for the true essence Qi to recover and we can do this." When he said this, he seemed to have thought of something and said, "Now that the danger is over, we can call back those disciples who were sent to the evil realm." Qi Yuntian said, "Teacher, disciple thinks that we can delay this matter." Meng Zhen said, "Are you worried that there will be other changes?" Qi Yuntian said, "It's not that. It's the message from the 2 realms instrument. It said that cultivating in the evil realm, even though the cultivation progress is not fast, it can train the disciple's mind. Therefore, disciple thinks that this is not a bad thing." In the future, if possible, send more disciples to cultivate there. The evil realm was not as rich in spiritual vigor as the mountain and sea realm. One could absorb as much spiritual vigor as one wanted. The amount of spiritual vigor that one could absorb every day was extremely limited. Every mouthful had to be treasured and not a single bit could be lost. As for the rest, they could only use medicinal pills to make up for it. The disciples who cultivated there were very hard. However, cultivating in such a harsh environment could also train people. Just like what he said, if one could persevere here, it was the same as tempering one's spirit and willpower. It would be very beneficial to one's future cultivation. Meng Zhen thought about it and nodded subconsciously. He said, then let's do this for now. As for your suggestion, it won't be too late to talk about it after the enemies of the Junchen realm are dealt with. Chapter 1425. Another 5 years passed, and the mountain and sea realm began to shake. The heaven and earth gate was once again pierced through, and clear light poured out as the great rock, Ingui, slowly squeezed into the realm. Sect leader Qin, Yu Xianshao, and Zhang Yan stood on the back of the Leviathan, looking out at the boundless lands and seas of the mountain and sea realm. Inwardly, they sighed. The divine abilities of mortal-shedding cultivators were simply too powerful. With the wave of a hand, they could destroy planets. Thankfully, they were fighting outside of the mountain and sea realm. If they had fought within the mountain and sea realm, things would have been completely different. Sect leader Qin said, Sect leader Yu, let's talk about Junchen in 3 days. Yu Xianshao agreed. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and bowed to him. After saying their goodbyes, sect leader Qin and Zhang Yan turned into streaks of light and flew toward the floating heavenly palace. At this time, the spiritual masters of the Qinsang school were already waiting below, led by Qi and Tian. When the two of them landed, they all went up to greet them. Lu Yenny led Tian Kun, Jiang Zheng, Wei Zihong, and Yuan Jianqing up to Zhang Yan. She bowed and said, Disciple welcomes master back. Zhang Yan smiled and nodded. Dispense with the formalities. Only then did the disciples straighten their backs. After exchanging greetings with the spiritual masters, Zhang Yan said his goodbyes, then called out to the 5 disciples and led them to the Crossing Truth Temple. Follow me into the realm, he said. He waved his sleeve, and the 5 disciples felt their vision blur. Then, they found themselves on top of a mountain surrounded by clouds and mist. After reaching mortal molting, cultivators didn't need to do anything. The paradise would naturally evolve into a lesser realm, so this place was becoming more and more similar to the outside world. Wei Zihong looked around and said, Is this the lesser realm opened by Master? The spiritual energy here is much more peaceful than the outside world, but it is also a bit weak. Zhang Yan laughed. Zihong is right. The spiritual qi here is different from the mountain and sea realm. The Junchen realm is exactly like this. Wei Zihong said in surprise, this realm has existences that even the exalted ones fear. Who would have thought that their spirituality would be inferior to that of the mountain and sea realm? Zhang Yan said, the heritage of this world is not as good as the 9 continents, and the spiritual opportunity is slightly inferior as well. However, it has a vast territory, and the number of cultivators is thousands of times more than ours. Therefore, there are many outstanding people here. Lu Yenny and the others did not say anything. They all listened attentively. They could tell that their teacher would not bring them here for no reason. There must be something he wanted to tell them. Zhang Yan continued, if there are no accidents, there shouldn't be any more twists and turns in the Junchen realm. Master and the few heavenly sages will get rid of the sovereign emperors of this realm. There will definitely be people in the realm who are not inferior to us. In order to suppress them, it will be up to you to deal with them. Lu Yenny looked over and said, Master wants to borrow the hands of the cultivators of the Junchen realm to train me and my junior brothers. Zhang Yan nodded and said, although the mountain and sea realm has eliminated all conflicts, there are no battles. For people of your generation, it is too easy. In the future, the cultivators of the Junchen realm will be your opponents. Furthermore, the spiritual qi there is also rich, and there are many pure purple spirit qi. Cultivating there is not necessarily any worse than cultivating in the mountain and sea realm. Lu Yeni and the others immediately understood. Their teacher was encouraging them to go to the mountain and sea realm. On one hand, they could suppress the cultivators of the mountain and train themselves. On the other hand, they could borrow the resources of the outer realm to cultivate. Furthermore, this was equivalent to weakening the strength of the mountain and sea realm. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand and a whirlpool appeared in the sky. Then, countless stones and soil gathered in one place. Before long, they formed a star, floating above the land. As he continued to operate the technique, in less than half an hour, there were more than 100 stars in the sky. This was his lesser realm. The yin and yang qi were controlled by him. Coupled with his unparalleled power, changing the sky and earth was a simple matter. It was just that it was not so easy for living things to grow. However, as long as there was enough spiritual qi, this could be ignored for the time being. He said, the mountains and rivers above are more or less the same as the Junqin realm. You can try to familiarize yourselves with them. In 10 to 20 years, the 9 continents will attack the Junqin realm again. After that, we will need to suppress the sects in the 4 directions. When that time comes, we will need your help. He flicked his finger again and 5 talismans flew into the hands of Lu Yeni and the others. He said, with this talisman, you can enter and exit this lesser realm at will. As long as you want to be a disciple of the Xianyuan faction, you can bring them in to cultivate. You can do whatever you want here. Even if you destroy the mountains and rivers of the continent, you only need to use the talisman. With child of mountain and river here to suppress it, the yin and yang qi will naturally be sorted out. Lu Yeni and the others were delighted and said, disciple thanks benefactor for the talismans. After arriving at the grotto heaven, they sparred with others. They were also afraid that they would accidentally destroy the mountains and rivers. Other than going to the virtual sky, they could not display their true abilities normally. Unexpectedly, there were so many benefits in the lesser realm. Naturally, they were delighted. Of course, this was also because Zhang Yan's lesser realm had just been established. Other than the separation of heaven and earth, there was nothing valuable. Even if they caused trouble, it would not be a problem. If it was a place like the White Deer continent, it would have been at least 10,000 years old. Under the nurturing of spiritual vigor, it would have grown many treasures. Zhang Yan took the opportunity to give pointers to the 5 of them before letting them go. However, when he looked around, he saw that Yuan Jianqing was still standing there. He said, disciple, do you have anything to say to me? Yuan Jianqing bowed and said, benefactor, disciple requests permission to go into closed-door training. Zhang Yan looked at him and said, although your cultivation level has reached the required level, it is not yet complete. Although it is a little early for you to go into closed-door training, if your Tao heart is right, there is still a chance. He pointed his finger and a spiritual light shot into the center of Yuan Jingqing's brows. He said, go. Yuan Jianqing thanked him and bowed again. Then, he held the talisman and left the lesser realm. Zhang Yan sat for a while and took out Kong Yin's Qianquan pouch from his sleeve. With his current status, he did not lack any external objects. He had his own treasures, so there was no need for him to covet others. However, he wanted to take a look and see if this would be related to this person's opportunity to step into the 3rd degree realm. Just as his mana was about to enter the pouch, it was blocked by a layer of barrier. He knew that although this person was dead, the divine intent that was left in the pouch had not completely dissipated. If one had not reached the level of this person, even if they obtained this item, they would not be able to open it. He smiled and activated the divine intent. In a flash, he appeared in an unknown space. He saw Kong Yin's silhouette standing there, but it was extremely blurry, as if it was about to dissipate. Without saying much, he punched out and instantly shattered Kong Yin's silhouette. As soon as the divine intent was broken, the restriction on the cosmos sac was instantly removed. He used his Fa Li to explore it and saw everything inside clearly. When he saw that there was nothing that could threaten him, he shook his Fa Li and released all of them. The treasures that Kong Yin had brought with him were also inside the pouch. Now that they were released, they wanted to scatter in all directions. However, they were restrained by Lu Ming's mana and had nowhere to run. In the end, they knew that they could not fight back and could only stay where they were. Zhang Yan did not care about these treasures. He reached out and took out a jade scroll. He opened it and saw that it was a Dao technique. Previously, he had some understanding of some of the techniques and techniques of Yuliangism. At this moment, it was not difficult for him to recognize that this was the biography of Xian Chen that was taught to the younger disciples of Yuliangism. It was not some profound Xian technique. However, under the words that were recorded, there were many comments and modifications. Almost every line could be seen. From the handwriting, there was no doubt that the person who wrote this was Kong Yin. He looked at it and understood that Kong Yin was preparing to modify this Dao technique to make it a superior technique. However, in the end, there were still dozens of lines that were not completed. He unconsciously shook his head and put it aside. His gaze swept across the room again. He pushed aside the bottles and instruments and took out another jade scroll. This jade slip was extremely special. There was actually a seal on it. His eyes flashed. He knew that there must be something hidden inside. He placed 2 fingers on the jade slip and gently wiped it. The seal on the jade slip was removed and the true appearance of the room was revealed. He focused and saw that there was a string of eroded characters on the jade scroll. After reading it for a while, he found that it contained a trace of Kong Yin's divine will. It was rare to hide the divine will in the eroded characters. However, it could be seen that this person had copied it based on something. He raised his head and searched seriously once more. In the end, he shook his head. It wasn't that the original object wasn't here, but just the area before him was still extremely valuable, and he could see many profundities from it. Thus, he concentrated his mind and carefully deduced. A few days later, he suddenly felt an enormous strand of divine will descend, and it seemed to want to guide him away. He immediately understood that it was Sect Master Qin who was calling out to him, so he withdrew his consciousness from the divine will and followed Sect Master Qin. In a moment of days, he'd already arrived at that mysterious place, and when he saw Sect Master Qin and Yu Xianshao were already here, he went forward to greet them. After a short moment, Shui Dingyuan, Meng Zhida, and Ing Chuanqiu arrived successively. When Sect Master Qin saw that everyone had arrived, he said, "Today, I invited all of you here to discuss the unfinished business of the Junchen realm. In this realm, the biggest power is the Qi Accumulation Palace. They have a total of 4 monarchs. Although the Yuliangism has lost Kong Yin, they still have some strength left. They still have 2 or 3 monarchs. If they work together, they can't be underestimated." Yu Xianshao said calmly, "This person can't be left alive." Sect Master Qin nodded slightly and said, "With the help of the great Kun Ingui, it won't be difficult for us to accomplish this. Although the threat in front of us can be resolved, the threat in the future is still there." He paused, then said in a serious tone, "We can't let our guard down against that true Yang expert." At this time, Zhang Yan said, "If the monarchs of the Junchen realm feel that they have nowhere else to go, it is very likely that they will leave behind clues about the mountain and sea realm and leak it to that person. If we encounter those who don't care about their own reputation, they might even use it to threaten us. There is no way to guard against that. That person will find out where we are sooner or later." Everyone thought about it carefully and nodded, thinking that it was very likely. If they thought about it in the worst-case scenario, it was even possible that the Yuliangism had made such arrangements in the past. Sect Master Qin said, "Therefore, we need to think about how to deal with that person in the future." Shui Dingyuan said, "Sect Master Qin, do you have a plan?" Sect Master Qin said, "Right now, there are 3 ways. First, if one of us can break through to that level, then we won't have to fear that person. Second, we can only do what Kong Yin did. Before that person arrives, we can go to the Void Primal Sea and find a place for cultivators to live. Then, even if the mountain and sea realm is targeted, we still have a way out. Shui Dingyuan asked again, what is the last way? Sect Master Qin's eyes shone slightly, and he said, we can try to find the place where the patriarchs of the sects of the 9 states ascended, and it won't be difficult to resolve this danger. Chapter 1426. Sect Master Qin had said there were 3 methods, but all 3 could be done at the same time. The first method was for cultivators to cultivate step by step. There were no shortcuts, but the true Yang realm was too far away. Who knew how many years it would take to cultivate to that level? Previously, the Great Dust Realm cultivators had predicted that the true Yang Almighty Being would arrive in 10,000 years. This was true, and the news that Sima Quan got from Sanren Rao was the same. However, this matter was too important. If there was a chance, he had to confirm it. The second method was the most feasible. Find the other realm. The 9 continents were not as clueless as Kong Yin. They already had a few clues, and if possible, they could give it a try. For example, the Cloud Whale clan had migrated over from a place called Horned Flower Realm, and they might even be able to find their way back. There was also the cultivator of the Golden Wand School who had left behind palaces in the 4 regions. He had left behind the sky compass. If they followed the compass, they might be able to find where he came from. But looking at the luxurious palaces, it was not hard to guess that the realm they came from was not simple. If they did not have absolute confidence, it was best to avoid contact with them. As for finding the patriarchs of the sects, it was both difficult and easy. The disciples of the younger generation only needed to find the patriarch's belongings, then burn incense and pray. Most likely, they would be able to sense something. However, this method depended on luck. Perhaps the patriarchs would not respond, or perhaps by the time they responded, many years would have passed. As for whether there were other methods, only the sect masters would know. There was no need to mention it. After discussing this matter, everyone agreed that they could not give the cultivators of the Junchen realm a chance to gather their strength. 10 years from now, they would attack the Junchen realm. At that time, not only would they wipe out the upper echelons of the Junchen realm, they would also find a way to control the various heavenly regions and force them to pay tribute. That way, the 9 continents would be able to use all sorts of cultivation materials, and it would truly become a lower realm of the mountain and sea realm. After the discussions were concluded, Zhang Yan withdrew the will of the divine. Inwardly, he began to ponder the matter. In his opinion, it was better to rely on oneself than to rely on others. If he wanted to deal with the almighty true Yang expert, relying on external help was not the way to solve the problem. If he could pose a threat to the Junchen realm now, then he could pose a threat to the mountain and sea realm in the future. Even if the 9 continents were able to find another realm, if that expert followed them, they would have no way to fight back, and would have no choice but to flee. But looking at it now, it might not be a bad thing. Under the pressure of such a great enemy, so long as one wasn't willing to sit still and wait for death, then one had no choice but to work hard to improve one's cultivation. Although he had just shed his mortal skin not too long ago, after this battle, he already had some understanding of how to reach the second stage. However, he still needed to accumulate his cultivation. Because cultivation did not lack external things, it would not take too long for him to step into the second stage. Only the second stage realm was within reach, but to cultivate to the third stage realm, who knew how long he would have to wait. In the hundreds of thousands of years of the Junchen realm, only Kong Ying had achieved this, which showed how difficult it was. But the 9 continents had a slight advantage. The Qinsang, Shaoqing, Nether Spring, and other sects had passed down superior techniques. At least before reaching the true Yang realm, their disciples would have techniques to rely on. After thinking about it, Zhang Yan picked up the jade slip with the etched inscription left behind by Kong Ying. His mind sank, and he continued to deduce if he could find any clues about the original item. In the Junchen realm, a magic ship with a dragon head was traversing through the void. Inside the cabin, Rao Wanderer was sitting on a praying mat with his eyes closed, as if he was trying to sense something. His aura rose and fell like the tide, and his Dharma body was also flowing with light, shining brightly. Sima Quan and Deng Zhenjuan were waiting below. Deng Zhenjuan said, I hope this trip goes well, and Wanderer can find those lost treasures. Ever since he had escaped from Gong Chang's grasp, he had sealed himself and sealed off his qi. He had locked himself in a wandering star and wandered around. Half a year ago, Sanren Rao and Sima Weili had found him again. Only then did they remove the seal and release him. Now that he had lost his corporeal body, even though he cultivated demonic techniques, it would be difficult for him to advance further in the future. Luckily, Rao Wanderer cherished old friendships and did not abandon him. His attitude towards him was the same as before. Sima Quan said, Gong Chang and Gong Shao are both missing. The Gong family is probably in a state of panic, and they have to be wary of the qi accumulation palace. They don't have the time to care about these things. This time, with Wanderer taking action, nothing will go wrong. After a few days, Rao Wanderer suddenly opened his eyes and stood up with an excited expression. He looked ahead with bright eyes and said, It's here. Sima Quan and Deng Zhenjuan looked over. In their eyes, there was nothing in front of them. Luckily, their senses were sharp. After staring for a while, they realized that the starlight around them would change at this time, and they knew that there must be something set up here. Rao Wanderer stretched out his hand and drew a talisman in the air with a few strokes. Finally, he pushed it lightly, and it floated away. After a while, the scenery in front of them changed. It was as if a mirror had shattered, and a huge star that looked like it was made of metal suddenly appeared. It was smooth and flawless, as bright as a silver crystal. Deng Zhenjuan exclaimed, Is this the Gong family's occult orb? Rao Wanderer nodded and said, That's right. This is it. The Gong brothers' thousands of years of accumulation is inside. If we get it, we can use it to strengthen the devil sect. Almost every powerful cultivator in the Junchen realm would set up one or more occult orbs and bury their inheritance or external medicine or secret treasures in them. This was to leave a way out for themselves, and at the same time, to prevent their teachings from being lost. After the Gong brothers were suppressed, they knew that they couldn't escape, so they willingly took out the occult orbs in exchange for their lives. After some consideration, Rao Wanderer agreed to only imprison them for 100 years, and then let them go. Sima Quan pondered and said, I thought the occult orbs were just a legend. I didn't expect them to really exist. It seems that the Yuliangism of the Qi accumulation palace also has this thing. If the 9 continents can get it, not only will we benefit from it, but we can also weaken the teachings of this world. Rao Wanderer said, You wait here. I'll be back soon. After that, he turned into a cloud of turbid fog and flew out of the spirit boat. With a turn, he disappeared into the occult orb. Sima Quan and True Lord Deng waited for a few days. Then, they saw the turbid fog fly out and land on the spirit boat. They hurriedly went up to greet him. Rao Wanderer seemed to be in a good mood. He said, We've gained a lot this time. The rise of our devil sect is in sight. He looked at the two of them and said, However, your strength is a little weak. You need to improve a little more. With a flip of his wrist, he took out the jade pot. Activating his art, the door of the small world opened wide. He then turned into turbid fog and wrapped the two of them inside. After entering the small world, he flew for 2 hours and landed on an altar made of dragon bones. Only then did he let the two of them out. He pointed to the front and said, Look over there. I've suppressed the Gong brothers here. The two of you will have to rely on them to improve your cultivation. Sima Quan and True Lord Deng couldn't help but look over. They saw a long mountain range in front of them. It was originally vast and majestic, but the clouds above it were faintly discernible. It was as if it had merged with the sky, giving it a celestial aura. Rao Wanderer waved his sleeve and stirred the wind and clouds in the air. All the fog dispersed. The two of them couldn't help but change their expressions. What they saw in front of them wasn't a mountain range at all. It was clearly a huge dragon lying in it. Its eyes were closed as if it was in a deep sleep. Under the dragon's claws, there was a majestic aura. From afar, it was blinding and dazzling, like two crimson blood suns. Rao Wanderer said, "This is the second son of Lord Yuhu. His name is Chang Chun. However, for some reason, he was imprisoned here by Lord Yuhu to guard this small world. I borrowed an artifact and controlled it to work for me. That's how I managed to suppress the two Gong brothers." Sima Quan was shocked. He said, "Could it be that this Chang Chun is still alive?" Rao Wanderer said, "Even though his body is here, his spirit is scattered. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been controlled by the artifact. You don't have to worry. That old dragon and I are one, so I can control this artifact. If it falls into the hands of others, it will be useless." True Lord Deng said excitedly, "Rao Wanderer, with this true dragon at my disposal, who in the Junqin realm can be a match for us?" Rao Wanderer wasn't so optimistic. He shook his head and said, "Chang Chun is strong, but he has many weaknesses. I have to expend a lot of energy to control him. Also, if I die, he won't move anymore. Those with high cultivation can bypass him and attack me." The palace master of the Qi accumulation palace, Yang Chuan, was able to stop Kong Yin. "I can't compare to him yet, so it's better to leave this person to the cultivators of the 9 continents." Hearing this, Sima Quan's eyes flickered. He acutely sensed that from Rao Wanderer's casual tone, he didn't seem to have any intention of becoming enemies with the 9 continents. Rao Wanderer said, "I promised the Gong brothers that after we find the occult orbs, I would only imprison them for 100 years before letting them go. But I didn't say I would let them off easy. The two of you can absorb as much of their vitality as you can." As he spoke, he used some unknown technique, and the dragon suddenly moved. Its claws clawed downwards, and strands of qi and blood floated out from the 2 red suns. The techniques of the Devil's sect could strengthen oneself by absorbing the opponent's vitality and spirit. However, the Gong brothers were usually one, and their bodies were almost impenetrable. But with Chang Chun's pressure, they had no choice but to use their strength to resist. Naturally, some of their qi and blood leaked out. Sima Quan knew that even if it was only a strand of their vitality, if they could absorb it into their bodies, it would be greatly beneficial to them. He immediately sat down cross-legged and continued to absorb the qi. 10 days later, both of their qi and blood had become much stronger. Rao Wanderer was very satisfied. He took out a spell, and the dragon quieted down again. He said, "Let's stop here. The qi and blood of these two are like the sun, strong and violent. They are different from those who specialize in qi. If we don't refine them in time, we will hurt ourselves instead." The two of them stopped cultivating and stood up from the altar. Deng Zhenjuan asked in high spirits, "Wanderer, are we going to Yuliangism?" Rao Wanderer nodded and said, "Yes, Bei Xiangtong has retreated to the left heaven domain of Yuliang. Obviously, he has given up on the main heaven domain and the right heaven domain. But we can't let the Qi accumulation palace take all the benefits. I should also take over a part of the heaven domain. In the future, it can be the place where our devil sect will rise again." Chapter 1427. After a day of calculation, Zhang Yan had completely deciphered the etched text. However, this was not the original text after all. It was just Kong Ying's imitation. Even Kong Ying himself might not be able to fully comprehend it, not to mention that Zhang Yan was separated by a layer. What he deciphered from it was confusing and messy. If that was all, it would not be of much use. However, he was not disappointed. For a mortal metamorphosis cultivator like him, as long as he could obtain the divine will left behind by his peers, he would be able to see many things from it. When Kong Ying was copying the etched text, he subconsciously integrated some of his divine will into it. However, it was not erased. It was unknown whether it was left behind on purpose or because he did not think that others would be able to see it. Zhang Yan sat down on the praying mat and intercepted the divine will. With a thought, his vision blurred and he found himself standing in front of a cave. He was facing a long and dark tunnel. In front of him was a Taoist in white. The Taoist had his back to him and was walking forward step by step. It seemed like he would soon disappear at the end of the tunnel. He could tell that the Taoist in white was Kong Ying. He looked around and found that the place was barren. There were no plants or trees. He was on a desolate planet. He looked at the sky and memorized the order of the stars. Then, he walked forward. He tried his best not to let Kong Ying see him. If he did not do so, the divine will would disperse on its own if it was hostile to him and could not push him out. When he entered the cave, he saw that the ground was littered with broken tablets and scrolls. The words on the tablets were blurred and indistinct. It was likely that a cultivator had stayed here before. Seeing that Kong Ying had stopped for a moment and looked at the tablets for a while, he seemed to have found some clues. He turned around and walked deeper into the cave. Zhang Yan understood that once a mortal metamorphosis cultivator reached the second stage, they would be able to observe the past with their spirit intent. As for how much they could see, it would depend on the cultivator's own magic power. Zhang Yan followed after them. The passageway was extremely long, as if it led to the depths of the earth. Furthermore, there were many forks along the way. Kong Ying, however, appeared to be extremely patient. He walked down step by step without using any of his transcendence energy. From time to time, he would even stop and observe his surroundings. Zhang Yan couldn't see anything in this God's will, but he deduced that in reality, there was either a restriction or it had already decayed and couldn't withstand any waves of magic power, which was why this person didn't fly forward. After walking for more than 10 days, the tunnel finally changed. The rough and uneven ground that was originally full of gravel was gradually replaced by smooth and flat bricks of gold and jade. Moreover, the path became more and more spacious. Many crimson cocoons could be seen on both sides of the wall, and vaguely, one could see that there seemed to be living creatures hiding in them. Kong Yin only took a few glances at it before skipping over it, as if he had no interest in examining it further. This was to be expected. A mortal metamorphosis cultivator could destroy a star with just a raise of his hand. No matter how strange those living creatures that relied on earth and star to survive were, they were no different from ants in his eyes. After walking along this flat path for a while, they arrived at a bottomless ravine. At the bottom of the ravine, one could vaguely see golden flames swirling around, and above it was a vast fog. Right in front of them, there was a crystal white object that was about 100 feet in size floating in the air. It looked like a human's heart, and there were thin threads that looked like spider silk growing out of it. They looked like human blood vessels and meridians, and they extended far into the distance, with no end in sight. Zhang Yan couldn't help but take a few more glances at it. Because he was in the god's will, he could only size up the object's appearance. He couldn't feel anything from it, and he couldn't accurately determine what it was. However, from the faint light on the thin threads, it was obvious that it was absorbing spiritual vigor and vitality from the outside. Not only that, after about 100 breaths, there was some kind of spiritual qi that flowed back through the threads, forming a cycle. He thought to himself, from the looks of it, it looks like a living creature. It doesn't look like it was born from the heavens and earth, but it looks like it was purposely created by a powerful being. I wonder what it's used for. Since Kong Yin is here, he must know something. He looked over, wanting to see how Kong Yin would deal with this object. However, he stood in front of the crystal for a long time without moving, as if he was thinking about something. In the end, it was unknown what decision he had made, but he walked towards a mountain path at the side, not caring about anything else. Zhang Yan didn't rush to catch up. Instead, he observed the surroundings and found that there were 2 earholes below, and Kong Yin was walking towards the one on the left. He looked to the right. The scenery here was created by Kong Yin's God's will. As long as the scenery was within the range of this person's senses, even if he had never been there personally, he could still go and see what was going on. However, he considered that if he were to cause any disturbance, this strand of God's will might dissipate prematurely, and the loss would outweigh the gain. Thus, he didn't turn towards that direction and continued to walk towards the left. The mountain path here wasn't long. In less than a dozen breaths, he arrived at a stone mansion. There was only a stone tablet here, and it was completely bare. Kong Yin stood in front of the tablet, but he was completely engrossed in it. Finally, he sat down again, as if he was trying to comprehend something. Zhang Yan knew that there should have been etchings on the stone tablet. If he wasn't mistaken, they should be the ones that Kong Yin had inscribed. It was just that the strand of God's will couldn't bear it, so it couldn't appear. Kong Yin sat there for a whole 10 years. When he stood up again, his entire person was completely different. Then, he turned around and looked towards where Zhang Yan was. This time, Zhang Yan didn't avoid it. Instead, he met it with his gaze. He could sense that this strand of God's will was about to run out. Whether he avoided it or not, there was no difference. Kong Yin took a deep look at Lin Dong. Then, he walked out and quickly brushed past Lin Dong. As his figure disappeared into the long tunnel, the entire world lit up with boundless light. Then, it dimmed and disappeared. Finally, it was as if smoke had been extinguished and it disappeared. Zhang Yan opened his eyes. Aside from the line of etchings, there was nothing else on the jade slip in front of him. At this moment, the few true treasures floating around him all trembled. When they sensed that the last strand of God's will had disappeared from this world, they all let out soft sobs. Zhang Yan looked up, and with a flash of water behind him, Xian Yuli was released. He said, "Your master is already dead. If you are willing to submit, you can enter the treasure pavilion. There will naturally be people who will come to refine you. If you are not willing, in order to prevent you from causing trouble, I can only seal you up first." Xian Yuli's body flickered, and he turned into a young man with an extraordinary aura. He said solemnly, "I would rather be imprisoned by your 9 continents. However, if I do that, my fellow Taoists will definitely make the same choice. In order to not delay them, I am willing to enter your treasure pavilion." Zhang Yan said, "Since it's your choice, then go." With a wave of his sleeve, he used his mana to wrap up all the treasures. Then, he called for a black flood dragon guard to come in and ordered him to place them in the treasure room. Later, there would be a guard who would spread the news of these treasures to the enlightened masters in the sect. That way, when someone needed them, they could come and borrow them. After dealing with this matter, he couldn't help but think deeply. When Kong Yin walked into the cave, he didn't show any hesitation. Clearly, he knew what he was going to do in advance. From the looks of it, even if there were no more clues in the treasures left behind by this person, perhaps he could try to find it in Yuliangism. That cave should be in some heaven domain of Junqin realm. 10 years later, when the 9 continents started their war again, he could try to find it. At this time, Jingyu walked in, bowed, and said, "Master, Zhang Chan is outside, asking to see you." Zhang Yan stopped thinking and said, "When I came back, wasn't he still guarding Wuxing?" Jingyu said, "Master, now that the formations on Wuxing and the mountain and sea continent have been completed, it is very convenient to travel between the 2 places. Jingyu arrived last night. I heard that Master had returned, so he hurried over." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "For him to come to see me in such a hurry, something good must have happened. Call him in." Jingyu acknowledged and turned to pass on the order. Not long after, Zhang Chan entered the hall, kowtowed in front of the steps, and said, "This lowly one kowtows to Master." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Rise." Zhang Chan's expression was full of excitement, as though he was asking for credit. He said eagerly, "Master, this lowly one was ordered by Master to search for Earth stars that contain spiritual opportunity, and I found 2 before the new year." Zhang Yan was also slightly surprised. It was not easy to find such Earth stars in the vast void sky, and he didn't expect to find 2 at once. He asked in detail and found out that Zhang Chan was really lucky. The 2 earthly stars were not far from each other, one big and one small. They were both illuminated by the same sun, and they were like brothers. Both earthly stars had given birth to living creatures, but they had been ferocious beasts for a long time. They had never seen an intelligent race like the Ruwu people. Although the danger of Junqin realm had been resolved, and there seemed to be no need to find a way out now, but everything had to be considered in the long term. Moreover, Putting this aside, the treasures produced on these Earth stars could definitely be used by cultivators. He asked, does the sect know about this? Zhang Chan said, without master's order, this lowly one wouldn't dare to say it. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, did you bring back some plants, metals, and stones from the 2 Earth stars? It was not the first time that Zhang Chan did this, and he quickly replied, I brought them back. Master has taken care of me, how could this lowly one neglect this matter? Zhang Yan nodded and said, you can send them to the Dan Ding courtyard. He stroked his robe, but he was thinking about something else. Compared to the mountain and sea realm, the Junqian realm had a lot more Earth stars for cultivators to live on. This was not natural, and many of them were built after birth. Why were there so few great demons in this realm? Many cultivators were captured, and their flesh, blood, and spiritual opportunity were used to irrigate the land. Then there were powerful people who used formations to harmonize yin and yang and the 5 elements. In less than 100 or 1,000 years, one could obtain a blessed land. The land of the mountain and sea realm was boundless, and the number of demons was also uncountable. In the future, great demons like the demon ancestor would be born, and they could be used to do this. Although the mountain and sea realm was thriving, with the 9 continents as a reference, there would come a day when spiritual opportunity would be exhausted. If they could use this method to send cultivators to the void sky, and then use the demon's flesh and blood to nourish spiritual opportunity, not only could they expand their power, but they could also better defend against external enemies, and they could also delay the decline of spiritual opportunity. Chapter 14:28. Zhang Yan wasn't just thinking about capturing demons and devils from the mountain and sea realm. He was also thinking about capturing greater demons and beasts from other realms, and using them to feed the mountain and sea realm. That way, he would have to find even more realms, and he would need the cultivators of the 9 continents to have enough cultivation bases to do so. If he ran into a realm that was overseen by an almighty expert, he would be putting himself in danger. Zhang Chan said from below, this lowly one has something that I want to present to master. Zhang Yan smiled. Last time you gave me a pig cow, which was quite useful. What do you want to give me this time? Zhang Chan shook his sleeve, and a puff of smoke drifted out to reveal a stone statue squatting in the middle of the hall. It was impossible to tell what the statue was made of. It had 2 horns on its head, and its body was covered with fish scales. Its tail was like that of a snake, and its body was like that of a lion or tiger. Its 4 claws were pressed against the ground, and its chest was puffed out. It looked majestic and awe-inspiring. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered as he sensed a faint life force coming from the statue. Zhang Chan stepped forward, patted the back of the statue, and said, still not waking up. Suddenly, there was a flash of spiritual light, and the creature's mane trembled. It let out a low roar as it shed its grayish-white skin and came to life. Its horns were like coral or crystalline jade, and its scales were covered with crimson patterns that glowed with dazzling spiritual light. It looked magnificent, and as it breathed in and out, a misty rain filled the air. Although its aura was only comparable to that of a Yuanian cultivator, it was still extraordinary. Zhang Chan scolded it, then prostrated itself on the ground and bowed. Master, this creature is called a winter centipede, he said. I found it on planet Earth. When it doesn't move, it transforms into stone. It looks almost dead, but when prey passes by, it will return to its fleshly body and bite it. Even if it doesn't eat for hundreds or thousands of years, it won't be a problem. Once it's subdued, it won't betray you. Master, the outside of the hall is cold and cheerless. It's a good idea to use this beast to guard the hall. Zhang Yan smiled and said, you're quite thoughtful. How many of them do you have? Being praised, Zhang Chan was delighted and said, there are about 100 of them, but I didn't bring them with me when I came here. They are all on the spiritual boat. However, there are many of them on that big planet. If Master wants more, I can try to catch more. Zhang Yan instructed Jingyu, take 30 of each and send them to Shangji and Dian Kong. Jingyu said, yes, Master. Zhang Yan said again, since the two Earth stars have been found, it's time to build the Tao of formations. Zhang Chan, if you need anything, you can discuss it with Jingyu. There's no need to ask me. Zhang Chan said, yes, master. However, there's one more thing. There are many Wu people on the Wu star who want to come to the Shanghai sect to cultivate. Can you allow them? Zhang Yan smiled and said, there's no problem. It's just that the Qinsang school doesn't accept demon disciples. If they want to go to other schools, there's no need to stop them. Zhang Chan chuckled and said, this lowly one understands. Zhang Yan flicked his finger and a talisman shot into the space between his eyebrows. He said, you can continue to look for the Ling Ji Earth star in the void sky. Don't neglect this matter. Zhang Chan's expression turned serious and said, I understand. Zhang Yan raised his hand and waved. Zhang Chan kowtowed and retreated respectfully. At this moment, Jingyu walked over and handed over a scroll of jade scrolls. He said, Master, this is a scroll sent by the two left and right hall masters. It's the cultivation material that was allocated by the hall after Master left. In fact, this scroll had been sent over a long time ago. It was just that after Zhang Yan came back, he went into closed-door cultivation and didn't care about the outside world. Thus, Jingyu didn't have the chance to hand it over. Zhang Yan took it and flipped through it. He thought for a moment and said, go and inform the two hall masters. In the future, they can follow this pattern. If there's any change, report to me. Jingyu said, I'll go and issue the order now. After Zhang Yan finished instructing them, his figure flashed, and he transformed into a rainbow that flew up into the sky. He called out in his heart, and he heard a mooing sound from afar. After a while, he saw the boar bull break through the layer of clouds and arrive before him, and it excitedly circled around him. Zhang Yan smiled and waved his sleeves. He got onto the thick couch on the back of the boar bull and sat down. The beast gave a low roar and turned its head to ride the wind. It left the Hall of Crossing Truth and headed towards the void sky. In the previous battle at Junqian Realm, Zhang Yan had used up all the clear spiritual qi he had. Even though the next battle was set to be 10 years later, the time limit wasn't long. Instead, it was slightly tight. Zhu Jin of the 9 provinces had to gather as much purple qi as he could. On the other hand, he had to recover his magic power and vitality. He didn't have much time to cultivate. However, as long as he could eliminate the hidden danger of Junqian Realm, it was worth it to pay this price. When the boar bull reached a high place, he saw 6 long formation paths rising from the ground and gradually entering the void. It was like a grand silver waterfall pouring down from the sky and hanging in the sky. This was the formation path that led to the location of the clear spiritual qi. After Zhu Jin went to Junqian Realm, the sects of the 9 provinces worked together to build it. This was also the arrangement made by Sect Master Qin and Sect Master Yu before they left. If they won the battle, then they could use this item when they returned. If they lost, then it would be changed to a forbidden formation and used to scheme against the cultivators of Junqian Realm. Zhang Yan took a few glances. There were 6 of these formation paths and they corresponded to every cultivator who shed their mortal skin. They could be considered as their personal belongings. If they didn't agree to it, they wouldn't be able to use it. However, if there were people who could shed their mortal skin in the future, then they would build another one. He stretched out his hand and pointed. He sent his qi into one of the formation paths. In an instant, the originally glorious and magnificent multicolored light seemed to have been ignited. It gave off a brilliant light that illuminated the entire heaven and earth. He didn't hesitate and urged the boar bull to go into the formation path. When he got in, he felt his body sink slightly. Then, he saw countless starlight go far away. When everything returned to normal, he was at the place where he harvested the clear spiritual qi. He nodded and thought, with the formation path, it's much easier. He calmed down and gathered the purple qi. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. Zhang Yan estimated that the purple qi that he had harvested was enough for him to deal with the next battle. It was about time to stop. If he continued, he would give the Junqian realm more time to prepare. Thus, he urged the boar bull to enter the formation path and return to the mountain and sea realm. Just now, he came out from the middle formation path. He felt a clear light flying over. He was slightly surprised and ordered the boar bull to stop at its original spot. That clear light stopped in front of him. Mengzhen walked out from it and cupped his hands. Hall Master Duzhen greets you. Zhang Yan returned the greeting and said, Mengzhen, is there something in the sect? Mengzhen said, there is indeed a matter that needs to trouble Hall Master Duzhen. Zhang Yan said, please speak, Reverend. Mengzhen took a step to the side and said, let's talk before we go. Zhang Yan nodded and agreed. The two of them went down together. Mengzhen said, Hall Master Duzhen, do you remember that before we attacked Junqian realm, you talked to Sect Master about Golden One sect and even suggested to find a few disciples to cultivate this sect's cultivation method? Zhang Yan said, there is such a thing. Did something go wrong when cultivating the cultivation method? Daoist Meng shook his head and said, there weren't any mistakes. These disciples have cultivated the Golden One sect's cultivation method for several decades, and they've all entered the core transformation realm. However, a few days ago, without exception, they all sensed an external object resonating with their bodies, and the direction all pointed towards that natural moat. Zhang Yan said, oh. He thought about the location of the four palaces and said, looks like there really is something in that chasm. Mengzhen said, Sect Master Duzhen also has the same opinion. Last month, he ordered me to go and investigate. After more than 10 days, I found an artifact. I ordered those disciples who cultivated Golden One sect's cultivation method to sense it and confirmed that it was this artifact that was calling them. I think there must be something hidden inside. However, this artifact has more than 1,000 doors, and every door is engraved with the sect's erosion runes, so we can't open it for now. At this point, he said in a deep voice, it's fine if it's other artifacts, but if it's the dual realm dial or the supreme dial, I'm afraid it will attract enemies. Zhang Yan thought for a moment and knew that there must be something important hidden here. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made such arrangements, so he asked, where is the artifact? Mengzhen said, it is placed on an island and temporarily guarded by Great Sage Crooked Lotus. Outsiders are not allowed to approach it without Sect Master Duzhen's order. We will go there now. Zhang Yan nodded. After about 10 breaths of time, the two of them landed on an island the size of a continent. There was an incomparably huge green lotus here, and an old man stood on top of it. When he saw the two of them, he bowed and said, greetings to the two of you. Mengzhen said, where is the artifact? Great Sage Crooked Lotus raised his foot and said, right here. As he moved, the lotus retreated and revealed a tall silver pillar. On it, there were many talismans moving around the pillar according to some mysterious pattern. Mengzhen asked, can Hall Master Duzhen break it? Zhang Yan looked in the sky for a while and said, it's hard to say now. The erosion runes here are much more profound than the ones carved on the previous palace gates, and there are many changes hidden within. It will take some time. Mengzhen said, Sect Master Duzhen said that if we can't solve it within 2 years, we can put this matter aside and come back to deal with the Junqian world cultivators. This artifact had been placed here for at least 100,000 years. Now that it was isolated from Ling Qi, there was no need to worry about it causing any commotion. Although it was something that needed to be solved, the Junqian world was obviously more important. Zhang Yan nodded and landed on the ground. Then, he sat down cross-legged and started to calculate. A few days later, he found that the erosion runes were even more profound than before. Among the thousands of gates, only one was the main gate. The erosion runes were constantly changing, and he had to keep up with them. Once he started, he couldn't stop for even a moment, or else he would have to start all over again. He didn't know if he would have a second chance, so he kept a close eye on it. After 3 months of hard work, he finally found the Real Gate. His eyes focused, and a beam of light shot out and landed on the silver pillar. The pillar shook slightly and stopped moving. Then, it revealed a gate as tall as a person. Chapter 1429. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go. TalkNet, providing you with wonderful novels to read. Zhang Yan saw that the door was open and said to Meng Zhen, I'll go in and take a look, I'll have to trouble Zhenren to wait outside. Love go small say net ku, Meng Zhen said, Hall Master Du Zhen, you must be careful. Zhang Yan said yes. He waved his sleeves and flew up with the wind. In a flash, he arrived in front of the door. He only looked at it from the outside before he stepped in. When he reached the inner room, he saw a golden one jade statue high up in the sky. It wasn't as huge as the one he saw before, it was only the size of a person, and it was enshrined on a large shelf. The other difference was that there were 3 portraits hanging behind this jade statue, and every portrait had a Taoist painted on it. The 3 of them bowed to the golden wand, and although their appearances weren't clear, one could tell from their postures and actions that they were extremely respectful when they bowed, and it could even be said to be fearful. While he was sizing it up, the door behind him slowly closed. He glanced at it but did not stop it. Even if this silver pillar was a real treasure, it would not be able to trap him if there was no one to control it. Moreover, even if there was any mysterious method, he could enter his own small world with a thought and jump out. Moreover, the door closed very slowly. Even if the cultivator's escape method was slightly faster, he could still go out. It was obviously not used to block people, so there was no need to worry. When the door was completely closed, the pearls on the wall began to emit a bright brilliance. The golden one jade statue also seemed to come alive. The feathers on its body fluttered. When it looked down, its golden eyes looked unusually dignified and cold. At the same time, Zhang Yan could feel that there was a spirit trying to rush down, as if it wanted to rush into his sea of consciousness. His eyes narrowed slightly. Judging from the 4 palaces that were left behind before, the people with the highest cultivation level would only stop at the Grotto Heaven realm. It was just that there were small worlds that were opened up before, which meant that there were people with a higher cultivation level. However, it was still unknown which realm they were at. He knew that the will of a cultivator at the 2nd level of the mortal metamorphosis realm was placed somewhere. As time passed, it would slowly dissipate. After 100,000 years, it would no longer exist. However, if a cultivator reached the 3rd level of the mortal metamorphosis realm, it would be different. As long as the object attached to it was not destroyed, it would not dissipate. Love go small say net chu. From the looks of it now, the person who cast the spell back then might be someone who had cut off the past and the future. Sensing that the divine will was still trying to come over, he pondered for a moment and also used his divine will to meet it. In the blink of an eye, the scenery in front of him changed. A beautiful woman with a high bun and bare arms, with ribbons around her body sat on top. She had one hand on her knee and the other holding a spell. She said to him, Since thou hast received my golden wand sect's cultivation method, thou hast become a disciple of my golden wand sect. Thou shalt kowtow and make an oath to be counted as a disciple of my sect. Zhang Yan was deep in thought. From her words, this should be the place where the golden wand sect passed down their cultivation method. Only disciples of the golden wand sect who had cultivated to a certain level could come here to receive their inheritance. After the woman finished speaking, she sat there without saying another word. Zhang Yan knew that if he did not make the oath, he would not be able to see the subsequent changes. He naturally would not do so. Moreover, he was certain that if it was someone else who came, they would really regret their decision at the last minute. Perhaps the Golden Wand sect would not let them leave safely in order to prevent the secret of this place from being leaked. However, these arrangements were at most targeted at lower-level disciples. For someone of his cultivation level, it was naturally not much of a threat. After withdrawing his consciousness, he walked around the Golden One statue and walked towards the back. Because the other palaces all had a small world, he originally thought there would be one here. However, after walking around, he found that this place was actually empty. Moreover, this inner room was rather narrow. Compared to the size of the entire silver pillar, it was not even 1%. He stood there thoughtfully for a while, then turned back to the door. He saw that this place was already sealed off, unable to leave through the proper path. It was not impossible to forcefully break through, but he was afraid that it would cause some unexpected changes. With a thought, the faint lightning around his body suddenly disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already outside. Seeing him come out, Meng Zhen came up and asked, "Hall Master Du Zhen, what is the situation inside?" Zhang Yan gave a brief explanation of the situation, then said, "If I'm not mistaken, this is a place where the Golden One sect passes down their techniques. Only by cultivating the sect's Taoist techniques to a certain level can you enter this inner room and obtain even more profound techniques. Only then will you be able to pry into the secrets of the sect." No one had come to this sect for 100,000 years, so he came to the conclusion that there were three possibilities. First, the cultivators of the Golden One sect who knew the location of the mountain and sea realm had long since died. Based on the clues he had found so far, this was most likely the case. Second, the legacy of the Golden One sect existed elsewhere, and they also knew of the existence of the mountain and sea realm. However, the people of that bloodline were not strong enough to travel through here, and could only wait for an opportunity. The last possibility was that the entire Golden One sect had perished, and the items found here were the last remnants of the sect. As for what exactly was going on, he would have to unravel the arrangements within the silver pillar, and perhaps he would be able to find out a thing or two. Meng Zhen said, "Even disciples who have cultivated the techniques of the Golden One sect won't be able to use the oath to kowtow. Once the oath was made, they would immediately become a member of the Golden One sect, and might even be placed under some sort of restrictive spell that would prevent them from escaping. If they had a choice, they wouldn't risk the lives of their disciples to do such a thing. They could find a way to avoid it, but they couldn't wait that long. Yuanying was easy, but if they needed to cultivate to the paradise realm, it would be extremely difficult." Zhang Yan smiled. "It's not that there's no way, but we need to invite someone here." Meng Zhen thought for a moment, then said, "Is it sect leader Shui?" Zhang Yan said, "That's right. Sect leader Shui can create an illusory realm, and it only takes a single thought to deceive that strand of divine will. If everything goes well, we can see the secrets of this sect." Meng Zhen nodded. The Golden One sect had made so many arrangements to cover it up. If it was just to leave behind a technique imparting artifact, then it was too much. Even if it wasn't the cultivators of the 9 continents, even if the cultivators of the Junchen realm entered the realm, they would discover these lost palaces sooner or later. They must find out the reason behind this. He said, "It's just that this door is closed again, so I'll have to trouble Hall Master Du Zhen again." Zhang Yan smiled. "If it can be opened once, it can be opened a second time." He immediately sat down and started to deduce again. Since he had more or less figured out some of the patterns of changes, it was much faster this time. In just a month or so, it was opened and closed again. When he stood up, he found that Shui Dingyuan had already arrived. He cupped his hands and said, "Sect leader Shui, I'll have to trouble you this time." Shui Dingyuan returned the greeting and said, "You're too kind. The Golden One sect and the 9 continents are also a great threat. How can I just stand by and watch?" Meng Zhen said, "In sect leader Shui's opinion, is it possible to use the illusory realm to deceive the divine will?" Shui Dingyuan was very cautious. He didn't say that he could definitely do it. He only said, "I'll have to try to know." When he finished, he bowed again and walked inside. This time, Zhang Yan didn't enter. He thought that the divine will should only be aimed at one person. If there were 2 mortal molts inside, it might cause unexpected changes. Shui Dingyuan went under the Golden One jade statue and tried to sense it. As expected, there was a strand of divine will shining down. He allowed the door behind him to close and sat down cross-legged. He activated the illusory mirage with all his strength. At this time, he no longer resisted the divine will and let it fall. In just an instant, the woman that Meng Zhen had spoken to him about appeared in front of him. She wanted him to kowtow and make an oath. Shui Dingyuan silently circulated his magic power and slowly concealed himself in the mirage realm. Then, a young cultivator that looked to be 17 or 18 years old appeared. Before he came here, he'd seen all the disciples that cultivated the Golden One sect's cultivation method and plucked a strand of their souls. At this moment, the illusory figure was called Qinjitong, and he was the one with the most profound cultivation among them. Not only did the illusory figure look the same as the original, even the soul was no different. Even the cultivation method of the original owner could be reproduced in the Mirage realm. Under Xue Dingyuan's command, the illusory figure knelt down without hesitation and made an oath. The woman said, "Since thou hast made the oath, thou hast become a formal disciple of my Golden One sect. I will now pass on to thee 3 techniques. Thou may choose one to practice, but remember not to be greedy. Find all the external materials necessary for cultivation. Every 10 years, I will allow thee to enter and leave this place once. If thou art accomplished in it, then come ask me again. If not, you may leave and choose a disciple to pass on this technique to. Only those who are proficient in it can come back here to seek the subsequent techniques." 3 jade scrolls fell in front of Qinjitong. He took one of them and held it in his hand. The other 2 didn't vanish and were still floating in the air. Xue Dingyuan ordered him to look at them one by one and found that they were only up to the Yuanying technique, so he didn't pay much attention to them. He randomly chose one and ordered Qin Jitong to cultivate the illusory figure. The Mirage realm was completely under his control. As long as his magical power and divine will were not exhausted, no matter how many years passed, there wouldn't be many changes on the outside. It was a trivial matter for him to evolve the Yuanying technique. After 300 years in the Mirage realm, Qin Jitong successfully entered the Yuanying realm. Fortunately, the external materials used were all based on his will, otherwise it would have taken a lot of effort. At this time, the woman seemed to look at him a little more seriously, but she didn't say much and bestowed him another technique. Xue Dingyuan looked at it. To deduce to the heavenly abode realm, it couldn't be done in one go. It required more divine will and magical power. However, he could extend the time sequence of the Mirage realm and not finish it in an instant. Soon, half a month passed. The door on the silver pillar opened and Xue Dingyuan walked out. When Zhang Yan and Meng Zhen saw him, they knew that he must have gained something. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come out from the front again. Meng Zhen said, "Sect Master Xue, how was it?" Xue Dingyuan said, "I didn't let you down. I was lucky enough to obtain this item." He raised his hand and lifted up an item. Zhang Yan looked at it and saw that it was a scroll. Although he was holding it in his hand, it felt fleeting as if it didn't exist, as if it was in another space. He asked, "Sect Master Xue, do you know what this is?" Xue Dingyuan said in a deep voice, "According to the woman, this item is called the map of the Mirage realm. As long as one's cultivation reaches the Golden Wing realm, which is roughly the level of us mortals, they can use this item to go to the ancestral realm of the Golden Phoenix sect." Chapter 1430. Zhang Yan's eyes unconsciously fell on the map. He didn't expect that Golden One sect would leave behind such an item instead of the 2 realms dial. He asked, "Sect Master Xue, may I have a look at this?" Xue Dingyuan said, "Please take a look, but this Xue can't open it." Zhang Yan took it, but even though it was the real thing in his hands, when he wanted to open it, the atlas became illusory as if it didn't exist. He handed it to Jinren Meng and said, "Jinren Meng, please take a look." Meng Zhen took it and examined it for a moment before saying, "I don't think it can be opened if it's not from the same origin." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "If one has the same cultivation as Kong Yin, they can open it. If Sect Master allows it, we can take it to Ngui's place and try it." Meng Zhen agreed, "Yes, it's better to report this matter to Sect Master first." He apologized to the 2, cupped his fists, and soared into the sky with the sealed world map. Zhang Yan said, "Sect Master Xue, since Great Sage Crooked Lotus became a protector of our sect, he has been moving thousands of trees and flowers on an island. I heard that the scenery there is exquisite and interesting. It's not far from here, why not take a look?" Xue Dingyuan knew that this matter wasn't over yet and that he would definitely be found later, so he said, "All right, this Xue will follow the host's wishes." When Great Sage Crooked Lotus heard that they were going to visit the island he managed, he was both happy and nervous. He quickly moved aside and said, "Two exalted venerables, please come this way." Zhang Yan raised his hand and made an inviting gesture. Xue Dingyuan cupped his fists and the two soared into the sky, heading southeast under Great Sage Crooked Lotus's guidance. After traveling for 100 breaths, Great Sage Crooked Lotus pointed and said, "Two exalted venerables, please take a look, this is Blue Sky Island." Xue Dingyuan looked over and saw a long and narrow island below. One side of the island was like a pagoda, with cliffs and cliffs towering like a forest. It was both dangerous and strange. The other side extended into the sea like a fish in the deep water. It was about the same size as the original 9 continents, but in the current Qinsang school's domain, it was just one of the thousands of islands. What was different about this place was that Great Sage Crooked Lotus had transplanted almost all the spirit plants that could be found in the northern heaven cold abyss to this place. Therefore, the place was filled with verdant greenery and had a clear spiritual aura. As soon as one got close to it, one would feel refreshed and their eyes would be clear. They could see that on one side of the island. There were also quite a number of cultivators having fun here. Many of the children formed by the plant spirits were also having fun together. As the island was full of exotic flowers and plants, the spiritual vigor was exceptionally clear. There was no cultivator's abode, and if one was lucky enough to lure a plant spirit to follow him out, it would be a great benefit. Xue Dingyuan looked around and subconsciously nodded. It's a good place. Great Sage Crooked Lotus was delighted. The star-leaning peak on the island has a spectacular view, and there's also the 100 Herb Spring that I've carefully guided here. It's a good place to taste tea. Zhang Yan said, "Then let's go to this place." The three of them turned in the sky and landed on a peak not long after. Xue Dingyuan looked around. As Great Sage Crooked Lotus said, this was a good place to go. It was the center of the spiritual vigor of the entire island. The leaves dripped like rain, the springs sang a clear sound, and the branches that fell into the ground would turn into new branches. It was a constant reflection of the wonders of life and death. What was rare was that this place looked like it was naturally formed, there was no trace of it being man-made. The spirit plants that were planted in the surroundings gathered their clear chi and slowly melted into a big cloud above them. It twisted and turned and moved up and down like a river. This was the 100 Herb Spring. It was naturally formed water. If it flowed on the land, it would be contaminated with impurities. Only by guiding it down from the sky and using cups made of xian could it be drunk. Great Sage Crooked Lotus called out, and a vine spirit wood demon came out and transformed into a tea table. It was simple and elegant, but it also contained a hint of Tao. A few plump fruits on a nearby tree shook and fell to the ground. They turned into a few white and fat frogs that looked like 2 or 3 years old. They jumped around and happily brought over plates of fruits and vegetables. These fruits and vegetables were formed from the essence of plants. No matter where they were placed, they were rare treasures. Due to the limited number of them, even people from the heavenly abode could replenish their essence by eating them. However, after Zhang Yan and Xue Dingyuan cultivated to the mortal transformation realm, other than external medicines like pure purple spiritual vigor, the essence of the world was no longer useful to them. However, it was fun to taste it occasionally. After the two sat down, they heard a few tinkling sounds that sounded like music. Drops of tea fell into the cups. Wisps of black chi condensed on the sides of the cups, and the tea inside gradually decreased. Great Sage Crooked Lotus explained, this 100 herbs sweet water can't be contaminated at all. Although this xian wood is also considered an external object, it has an advantage. If it's contaminated, it will solidify. This way, the water can be kept clear. Xue Dingyuan picked up a cup and took a sip. He nodded slightly and said, "It's sweet and refreshing. It's a good tea. It reminds me of the Golden Phoenix cult's wandering spirit water." Zhang Yan's expression changed slightly. He said, "Is it what sect Master Xue saw in the illusion?" Xue Dingyuan smiled. "Since you want me to go to the ancestral realm, you must give me some benefits." If the Golden Phoenix cult isn't lying, the wandering spirit water can make up for the consumption of divine will. Then there's the Swift Feet powder. It sounds like an ordinary item, but it can actually strengthen one's vitality. However, this is only a manifestation of the divine will. I can sense it a little, but I can't see it in person. Zhang Yan smiled. He also picked up the cup in front of him and took a sip. He said, "The future is long. You might not be able to see it today, but you might not be able to see it tomorrow." Xue Dingyuan nodded slowly. "You're right." He understood that after witnessing the vastness of the outside world, the cultivators of the 9 continents would no longer be trapped in a corner of the mountain and sea realm. Once their strength reached a certain level, they would definitely choose to expand outwards. Since the Golden Phoenix cult was pointing them in the right direction, they would sooner or later come knocking on their door. Zhang Yan said, "The Golden Phoenix cult's cultivation method is also based on qi. However, they say that mortals can shed their golden wings. What is the meaning behind this?" Xue Dingyuan said, "That's because the natives of the Golden Phoenix cult's ancestral realm are not purely human. They are proud of the Golden Wan bloodline, and consider themselves to be descendants of the Golden Wan. Normally, they look no different from us. However, if their mood is agitated, or if they circulate their magic power, a pair of wings will appear on their backs. Gold represents immortality. The so-called Golden Wings realm is a realm in which, after attaining a Dharma body, the wings on their fleshly body can be refined into magical treasures that will accompany them forever." Zhang Yan said, "Then what kind of person is in charge of the cult?" This was the key question. Xue Dingyuan thought for a moment, then said, "The divine will appears to be a human cultivator and a descendant of the Golden Wan. However, this is most likely only on the surface. As long as the Golden Wan is high and mighty, as long as the descendants of the Golden Wan are not too flawed, human cultivators will never be able to keep pace with them." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Sect Master Xue, do you know who the woman in the divine will is?" Xue Dingyuan said, "She calls herself the Minister of Salvation. She said that if disciples return to the ancestral realm, they need to report her name, in case there is no one to receive them." Zhang Yan said, "Someone whose divine will is undamaged must have a high cultivation level." However, from what Sect Master Xue said, according to common sense, she was not an honorable person in the cult at that time. Xue Dingyuan said, "That silver pillar has been in our world for at least 100,000 years. It is hard to say what changes have occurred after such a long time." After the two of them spoke for a while, they both sensed sect leader Qin's divine will coming over to summon them. They both summoned their divine wills and arrived at the mysterious void space one after another. However, they saw that Yu Xianxiao and Ing Chuanqiu had already arrived before them. After greeting the Zenrens, Sect Master Qin said, "Sect Master Xue, please tell the Zenrens about what you saw in the silver pillar in detail." Xue Dingyuan cupped his hands and said, "Of course." Then, he told the Zenrens everything he saw in the silver pillar in full detail. Sect Master Qin said, "I have already asked Ding Gue to solve the map of the Yingxian realm. Sect Master Xue, just now, can we use this item to go to the Golden One cult's ancestral land?" Xue Dingyuan replied, "That is what the woman in the divine will said." Sect Master Qin said, "Only, in that diagram, the locations of the 4 realms are clearly indicated. In that case, either Golden One sect's ancestral land is scattered in these 4 places, or, apart from that ancestral land, there are at least 3 other realms that are known to them, or lower realms." When the Zenrens heard this, their hearts trembled slightly. They had the intention of turning the Jun Qin realm into the mountain and sea realm, but if the Golden One cult controlled 3 realms, how powerful would they be? Ing Chuanqiu said, "If this cult has been around for a long enough time, it is highly possible that such a situation exists." Everyone understood what he meant. They had originally migrated from the 9 provinces sect, and the reason for this was that their spiritual opportunity had been exhausted, and they had no choice but to look for a new heaven. If the Golden One cult had existed long enough, it would not be strange for them to live in other realms. Xue Dingyuan said, "The divine will was left at least 100,000 years ago. From all the signs, the Golden One cult must have been prosperous at that time. It is highly possible that they occupied the four realms, or else they would not have been drawn on the map. However, if it was like that 100,000 years ago, it might not be like that after 100,000 years. According to Zhenren Zhang, the Golden One cult had a great battle with Mount Qingjue, and within a short 100 years, they were on the verge of collapse, and the remaining cult members fled in all directions. That must have been because the upper levels of the cult no longer existed. Meng Zhida said in a low voice, "Sect Master Shui, if Mount Qingjue had a great victory back then the place indicated on the map might have become their territory." Shui Dingyuan said, "It is not impossible." All of them were deep in thought. Now that they had obtained this world map, they wanted to learn more about the Void Realm from it. However, if the enemy was strong, they had to be very cautious. The Golden One sect seemed to be very powerful, but in comparison, Mount Qingjue, who had almost annihilated the sect, was clearly superior. Zhang Yan thought for a moment, and said, "If Mount Qingjue really occupied these realms, we actually have a better chance." However, these two sects must have people who have severed the past and the future, and there might even be true Yang cultivators. If we are going to search for them, there should at least be people who can fight them. Why don't we wait until after the Junqin realm is over, then we can think about it. Chapter 1431. Zhang Yan thought that since Qingjue Mountain occupied the former territory of the Golden One sect, he would have a chance. That was because he had obtained Zhuahang's spiritual boat, and in his last words, he had begged Zhang Yan to bring his body back to the sect. From the instrument that Zhuahang used and the stone jade coral on the spiritual boat, it was clear that this person had an extraordinary status in the sect. As long as Qingjue Mountain was not destroyed, his name would definitely be recorded in the sect records. This was actually a very good excuse. Of course, he would not follow it. Those who could see the past and the future did not need him to say anything. They would be able to see some of the past from Zhuahang's body, which could expose the existence of the mountain and sea realm. Even if the 9 continents were more powerful than the 9 continents, such a thing must be avoided. Moreover, in the current situation, whether it was Qingjue Mountain or the Golden One sect, they should be more powerful than the 9 continents. Because of the threat of the true Yang Great Demon, the cultivators of the 9 continents had to find a void realm that could accommodate cultivators as an escape route. Now that they had this realm map, they had at least one more option. However, now was not the time to take the initiative to look for it. Instead, they had to do their best to guard against it. When their own strength allowed them to, perhaps the situation could be reversed. Sect leader Qin said, "We did not find anything like the Two Realms dial in the Golden One sect's inherited artifact. If the people of the Golden One sect did not set it up in other realms, then as Hall Master Duzhen said, this matter is not urgent right now. We can put it aside and talk about it in the future." Yu Xianshao said, "That's right. Conquering the Junqin realm is just now." Sect leader Qin asked, "How are the preparations for the past few years?" Yu Xianshao said, "The Shaoqing sect has been waiting for a long time. We can move at any time." Shui Dingyuan bowed and said, "I have prepared everything." In the past few years, not only had everyone recovered their vitality, their strength had also increased slightly. Moreover, they had collected enough purple pure spiritual vigor. Even if they were to fight with Kong Ying again, they would be able to hold on. Sect Master Qin nodded and said, "In that case, a month later, we will depart for Junqinjie." He then looked towards Zhang Yan and said, "Even though Kong Ying is dead, the cultivators of Junqinjie cannot be underestimated. Hall Master Duzhen can try to ask Xi Jinren again to prevent any mistakes." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "This disciple understands." After chatting for a while more, the group dispersed. After Zhang Yan's spirit left, he and Shui Dingyuan enjoyed the sweet tea on the peak for half a day. Then, he bid farewell to Shui Dingyuan and returned to the Duzhen Hall. When he entered the hall, he came to the hall where the two-realm dial was placed. He waved his sleeve and a spiritual light rose. After waiting for a while, a Taoist finally appeared and said, "Taoist Zhang, you're too kind." Zhang Yan nodded and said, is it convenient at Xizhenren's place? Sima Quan said, it's fine. If there's anything, just tell me. Zhang Yan said, I'll be coming to Junqin Jia with the other Taoists soon. Sima Quan needs to make preparations. Sima Quan couldn't help but feel excited. Zhang Yan then said, has there been any change in Junqin Jia recently? Sima Quan said, there's something I need to report to Taoist. That Rao Sanren didn't die. Instead, he came out of seclusion and his cultivation improved. However, his identity is really shocking. Then, he gave a speech and told Zhang Yan about what happened to Rao Sanren. It was also because Yi Gui hadn't had enough spirit and couldn't take the initiative to report. Otherwise, the news wouldn't have waited until now and would have been reported to the mountain and sea realm. When Zhang Yan heard this, he was slightly surprised and said, oh, so that Rao Sanren was a clone of the Dragon Monarch? Ha, it seems like this person's plans are quite far-fetched. However, to be able to suppress the two Gong brothers, he's quite capable. The 9 provinces had already made preparations to face all the monarchs of Junqin Jie. Although Gong Shao and Gong Chang weren't here, there was Rao Sanren whose strength was unknown. It was hard to say if they had an advantage here. After all, this person had the body of a true dragon to control. As for how strong he was, they had to fight to know. However, Sima Quan said, Taoist, I see that Rao Sanren doesn't have the heart to go against the 9 provinces. Perhaps we can try to rope him in. Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, Taoist Sima Quan, just now, you say that this person has reached the 2nd stage. Sima Quan said, it should be so. Not only did he say it himself, but I also see that his aura is much stronger than before. Zhang Yan thought for a moment and asked, after this person left the small world, is there any difference in how he treats Taoists compared to before? Sima Quan said, not really. His reaction was very fast. He thought for a moment and said in a low voice, Taoist, are you saying that I made a mistake somewhere? Zhang Yan waved his hand and said, it might not be a mistake. It's just that people who have reached the 2nd stage, if they don't care about the price, can slightly observe the past of others. If this person is serious, he might be able to detect some abnormalities on Taoist Sima. Sima Quan was slightly shocked. He thought for a moment. He knew his own situation. Even if he could hide his aura very well, he was no longer the same person since the day the demonic poison invaded his body. If he really used his heart to observe, he might be able to see some flaws. He pondered and said, Taoist, are you saying that the words I heard are very likely to be this person's test? Zhang Yan smiled and said, that might not be the case. I heard Taoist Sima say that this Rao Sanren is a person who cherishes old friendships. He never suspects the people he uses, and never uses the people he suspects. I think he wouldn't casually cast a spell on Taoist. That might be what he said from the bottom of his heart. However, it's better to be prepared for everything. Sima Quan nodded and said, Taoist is right. Zhang Yan said again, when Taoist Sima is beside this person, you can keep an eye on him and find a chance to test him. If it's necessary, you can reveal your identity and tell this person that the 9 continents can help him with what he wants. However, you need to be careful and don't put your own people in danger. Sima Quan bowed and said, Sima understands. He was very clear that the current situation was different from the past. The cultivators of the 9 continents had a higher chance of winning against the Junqin realm. Moreover, Rao Sanren wasn't from a big sect. If it didn't involve his own benefits, there was no need for him to fight to the death with the 9 continents. Moreover, the 9 continents didn't treat the devil sect as harshly as the Junqin realm. Therefore, there was a high chance that he could convince the other party. He asked, may I know where do you want me to bring the sky-piercing Gui this time? Zhang Yan said, the previous attack was a strange plan and not a righteous one. With the incident of Yuliangism, the defense of the Qi accumulation palace will be much tighter than usual and won't give us another chance. Therefore, if the few of you want to have a fair battle with him this time, it won't be a big problem for us to enter the fallen world. Daoist Sima can just place the sky-piercing Gui at any place outside the Qi accumulation palace. Sima Quan said, please, Daoist masters. I won't make a mistake. At this moment, he saw the spiritual light flashing on the sky-piercing Gui and knew that the spiritual opportunity was running out again. He bowed and waited for Zhang Yan's figure to leave before he pressed his hand down and suppressed the spiritual light. After thinking for a long time in this secret room, he walked out. At this moment, he was standing in a palace. In the distance was an earth star and there was a spiritual boat patrolling outside. When they saw him coming from the palace, they respectfully gave way. Taking advantage of the fact that the Gong brothers were trapped in the Jade Pot small world and Bei Xiangtong had retreated to the left heavenly region, most of the land of Yuliangism had no one to manage the overall situation. Thus, he led his original subordinates and easily occupied this heavenly region. However, he didn't dare to take too much. First of all, he didn't have many subordinates on the surface. Second of all, if his appetite was too big, he would have to face the Qi accumulation palace directly. This was something they didn't want to see at this moment. Over the years, many true monarchs from the original Yuliangism joined the Qi accumulation palace and rebuilt the formation Dao. This caused the cultivators of the Qi accumulation palace to continuously come to the right heavenly region. However, the Qi accumulation palace and the Qi accumulation palace had their eyes on the forces of the Gong brothers first and didn't care about the Qi accumulation palace for the time being. However, he didn't dare to let his guard down. Every once in a while, he would personally go out to patrol. This way, he could avoid Sanren Rao in case there was news from the 9 continents. It was also convenient for him to use the dual realm dial. At this moment, a ray of spiritual light suddenly flew over and actually shot straight into the palace, heading towards where Sima Quan was. He took a look and raised his hand to pick it up, opening it to take a look. Unconsciously, his expression turned solemn. He called out to his subordinates and leapt out of the palace, into the void, once again transforming into a ray of light and shooting towards the Earth star. In no time, he passed through the air barrier and landed in the vast ocean on the Earth star. He then flew straight down to the depths of the ravine. In a flash, he entered a magnificent water palace. True monarch Deng was already waiting in front of the door. He bowed and said, Daoist Quan Ming, Sanren Rao has something to discuss with us. We've been waiting for a long time. Sima Quan bowed back and didn't say anything else. He walked into the inner hall with him. Sanren Rao was standing under a stone wall with his hands behind his back. When he saw the two of them enter, he said casually, You two are here. Sima Quan bowed and said, Quan Ming was delayed on the way here. Sorry for making you wait. Sanren Rao raised his hand and gestured for them to sit down. He smiled and said, How is this Daoist Quan Ming's fault? It was just a spur-of-the-moment idea. It's not your fault. He returned to the main seat and asked the two of them to sit down. First, he asked them for a while with concern. Then, he told them the reason why he invited them here. Yesterday, Bei Xiangtong suddenly came to me through his divine will. He said that he's willing to help me fight against the Qi accumulation palace. What do you two think? True monarch Deng thought about it carefully and said, I think we can agree. We've spent so much effort to occupy this heavenly region. If the people from the Qi accumulation palace come, wouldn't we have to give it up? With an emperor and Sanren working together with the body of a true dragon, the Qi accumulation palace wouldn't dare to attack us easily. Sanren Rao grunted and looked at Sima Quan. What do you think, Daoist Quan Ming? Sima Quan pondered for a while and said, I think this person is just testing if Sanren Rao is a friend or foe. Sanren Rao can agree to him as a sign of goodwill. If he wants to sign an oath with me, then we can discuss it in detail. If he doesn't mention it again, then there's no need to bother with him. Sanren Rao laughed and said, You're right. That's Bei Xiangtong's intention. At a time like this, if I don't fight with him first, it'll benefit the Qi accumulation palace instead. Sima Quan heard something unusual and said, Sanren Rao, could it be that the Qi accumulation palace is making a move? Sanren Rao said, I received news yesterday that Jiang Kan and Shang Zhou are heading here. If not, why would Bei Xiangtong come looking for me in such a hurry? Sima Quan asked tentatively, I wonder what Jinren's intention is. Sanren Rao was silent for a while before he sneered and said, if they don't come to provoke me, then so be it. If they don't want to, they're not the only choice I have. Chapter 1432. A month later, the 9-continent cultivators gathered on the heaven-patching formation. Because everything in the inner realm had been arranged during the last expedition, there was no need to give any more orders. This time, it didn't take much time. Just 1 hour later, Big Kun, Ingui, carried all the true essence cultivators, broke through the world gate, and escaped. After the 6 mortal metamorphosis cultivators left, the people of the various grotto heavens began to prepare for the battle. If everything went smoothly, the upper echelons of the Junqin realm would be wiped out. Next, it would be their turn. There were many cultivators there and they were all very strong. They needed to prepare early. In the void essence sea, Zhang Yan stood on the back of the great Kun. He looked at the holes that were forming and disappearing. His eyes were deep. Shui Dingyuan walked over and asked, What are you looking at, Daoist Zhang? Back when I first entered the mountain and sea realm, Zhang Yan said, I once saw a void that was very similar to the 9 continents. However, the void's vital sea was constantly changing, so it was impossible for me to see it again. Shui Dingyuan said, I remember Daoist said that if you can't see it now, it doesn't mean you can't see it in the future. Zhang Yan smiled. He glanced at the void behind him and said, That is indeed the case. If we are fated, we will meet again. Yang Chuan looked at the map of Yuliangism. Last year, he had received a secret report that Gong Chang and Gong Shao had suddenly disappeared. Bei Xiangtong was the only emperor left in the entire Yuliangism. After learning of this, he tried to rope in Bei Xiangtong. If the latter agreed, then he could unify all the forces in the Junqin realm without any bloodshed. Unfortunately, the proposal was rejected. He didn't hesitate and immediately sent Jiang Kan and Shang Zhou to the heaven domain of Yuliangism. He was determined to seize this chance to force Yuliangism to surrender. It had been more than 6 months. A month ago, news came that they had successfully taken over the middle heaven domain of Yuliang and controlled the restriction formation. The next step was to officially act against this person. He expected that in another year and a half, if nothing unexpected happened, he could deal with this person. If Gong Shao and Gong Chang suddenly appeared, he could use his array Dao to deal with them. However, because the whereabouts of these 2 people were unknown, and Gong Chang had the intention to rely on them, he had left the few heavens that the Gong brothers controlled untouched. However, he wouldn't wait for too long. After dealing with Bei Xiangtong, if he still didn't see these 2 people appear, he didn't mind swallowing those heavens. After dealing with these matters, he would be able to concentrate all his strength to deal with the cultivators of the 9 continents. Just as he was thinking, he suddenly felt his heart throbbing, and he couldn't help but frown. Ever since he became the palace lord of the Qi-accumulating palace, perhaps it was because of the treasure, he could sometimes sense his own good or bad luck. This time, it was stronger than ever. He immediately realized that something concerning his own safety was about to happen. After Kong Ying and the old dragon died, there was almost no one in Junqin world who could fight against him. The threat might come from beyond the sky. He subconsciously looked at the sky, and his eyes revealed deep fear. Could it be that these people are coming again? He originally thought that the cultivators of the 9 continents would at least take a few decades to arrive, but he didn't expect them to arrive so quickly. After thinking for a long time, he came to the front of an artifact that looked like it was made of several crystal chains, and he raised his hand to press it. This was a 2-realm dial forged by the Qi-accumulating palace. The middle heavens of Yuliangism were extremely far away from here. Even with the array Dao, it was very inconvenient to send messages. In order not to delay the important matters, he used this item. However, this kind of artifact was not easy to forge, and it could only be used 2 or 3 times in a short period of time. It wasn't just because of the accumulation of spiritual vigor, but also because the precious materials used to forge it might not be able to withstand it. If it wasn't an extremely urgent matter, he would try not to use it, and only use the telepathic communication to send messages. There was a flash of brilliance on the dial, and after a while, Shang Zhou's blurry figure appeared. He bowed and said, "Palace Lord, do you have any orders?" Yang Chuan asked in a deep voice, "How's the progress?" Shang Zhou replied, "In the middle heavens of Yuliang, none of the Yuliangism people resisted, and all surrendered to me. It can be said to be very smooth." Yang Chuan sneered and said, "Konging can control people with jade of knowledge, but it's difficult to control people's hearts. This is also expected." Shang Zhou said, "Palace Lord is right." Yang Chuan said, "What is Bei Xiangtong's reaction now?" Shang Zhou said, "Bei Xiangtong is still holed up, I don't know what he's planning." Yang Chuan was silent for a while, and said in a serious tone, "You have to try your best to take down this person within the year." Shang Zhou was a little surprised. According to the original plan, they would first occupy a part of the Middle Heavens, then gradually invade Bei Xiangtong's territory to test his bottom line. It would be best if they could force him out of his nest, then it would be much easier to deal with him. However, this was a long process that might take several years or even decades. Now that they had directly attacked, it was very likely that they would have to face countless restrictions and spirit arrays. In that case, the advantage they had in numbers would be greatly reduced. He said honestly, "Palace Lord, with just the two of us, our chances of winning are much lower. We might not be able to take down this person, and there will be more troubles in the future." Yang Chuan said, "I will send Protector Duan to help you, is there any problem?" Shang Zhou bowed and said, "If it's 3 people, then it's enough." Protector Duan's name was Duan Su. He was the emperor who was forced to submit to Qi Accumulation Palace when Yuliang and Qi Accumulation Palace worked together to sweep through Junqian realm. Because he signed a contract with the palace, Yang Chuan was very assured of him. Previously, when he brought Jiang and Shang to Yuliangism, he was in charge of guarding the palace gate. When the light on the dial faded, Shang Zhou also calmed down. He turned around and said to Jiang Can, who was standing at the side, "I don't know why Palace Lord changed his mind. Could it be that the Gong brothers have appeared again?" Jiang Can thought and said, "It can't be the Gong brothers. If such news appeared, we should be the first to know. It's because something unexpected happened, that's why Palace Lord is in such a rush." Unexpected happened? Shang Zhou was shocked. Could it be the cultivators of the 9 states? Jiang Can said coldly, "The cultivators of the 9 states won't arrive so quickly, maybe Palace Lord sensed something. Since Palace Lord has ordered, we'll just do it." In reality, everything they were doing now was to race against time with the cultivators of the 9 states. There was no time to slowly plan. Even though they knew there were some places that they missed out on, they could only act first. 100 days later, Guli arrived at the Middle Heaven region with the help of Formation Path. The 3 discussed for a while, then boarded the carriage and headed towards the Left Heaven region. Although Bei Xiangtong didn't move, it didn't mean that he didn't pay attention to the situation in the Middle Heaven region. He also left a lot of eyes and ears there. The movement of 3 imperial emperors heading towards the Left Heaven region couldn't be concealed. He immediately knew about it. If it was just 2, he could use the geographical advantage to deal with them, but he couldn't stop 3 no matter what. He needed to find allies to deal with them. He thought for a long time and released his spirit intent. At the same time, Rao Sanren, who was sitting, sensed it and merged his spirit intent with it. In an instant, the 2 met in a dark space. Rao Sanren bowed and said, "I wonder why you're looking for me." Bei Xiang bowed to Tong and said, "The Qi Accumulation Palace has come looking for me. This time, Jiang, Shang, and Duan have come. I can't handle them alone, but if you are willing to help me, with the strength of the 2 of us, coupled with the prohibition formation, it will not be a problem to stop these 3 people." Rao Sanren didn't respond immediately. Bei Xiangtong's expression was very calm. He said, "You're not willing." Sanren Rao shook his head and said, "Previously, fellow Taoist has erased all information related to me, preventing Jiang Kan and the other two from discovering my whereabouts. For this, I am extremely grateful, and it can be said that I owe fellow Taoist a favor. I will definitely help you with this, but I have a concern." Bei Xiangtong said, "Is it because of Yang Chuan? If he comes, it's indeed not easy to deal with, but you know where the Gong brothers are. If you get their help, it won't be hard to stop Yang Chuan." Rao Sanren glanced over. No wonder they approached him several times before, it was because of this. But if the Gong brothers were released now, they might turn around to deal with him first, so he definitely wouldn't do that. He laughed and said, "I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you. I do know where the Gong brothers are, but because of the oath, it's not convenient for them to show themselves now." Bei Xiangtong nodded. "Then how long will it take?" Rao Sanren replied, "At least 100 years later." He didn't hide this, because according to his estimation, in less than 100 years, Junchen realm would undergo a huge change. Bei Xiangtong pondered, "If that's the case, with just the two of us, it's indeed impossible to deal with Yang Chuan, but I still want to invite you to help me defeat Jiang Kan and the other two." Rao Sanren looked at him with surprise. He said, "Do you have any other plans?" Bei said to Tong, "The Qi Accumulation Palace had tried to recruit me previously, but I did not agree. That was because I took the initiative to submit to them. Not to mention that they might not value me much, they might even force me to sign that contract. However, if we were to discuss this with them after we have defeated Jiang Kan and the other two, Yang Chuan would have some misgivings and there is a high possibility that he would make a concession." Rao Sanren nodded. He thought for a while and said, "Since you're so frank, then I'll tell you my plan." After a pause, he said, "I'm a cultivator of the demonic sect. To me, there's not much difference between Qi Accumulation Palace and the cultivators of the 9 continents. Do you understand what I'm saying?" How could Bei Xiangtong not understand? His eyes narrowed. "So you have such a plan. Not bad. To you, this might be a way out." Rao Sanren said leisurely, "If I agree to advance and retreat with you, but if you're not willing to do it, because of the oath, then I might cut off this path. But if you're willing, then I can immediately sign a contract with you." Chapter 1433. At this point, Bei Xiangtong already knew Wanderer Rao's plan. He understood that if they could come to an agreement, then today's topic could still be continued. If he couldn't accept it, then they could only part ways. He didn't answer immediately, but pondered over it. Wanderer Rao didn't rush him. The situation was advantageous to him. Jiang Kan and the other two were rushing towards the left sky region, and Bei Xiangtong couldn't find any helpers other than him. If he didn't want to surrender, then he could only abandon everything and escape. But this could only be for a while. The threat of an imperial emperor was too great. The Qi Accumulation Palace might not let him go in order to prevent future troubles. But if this person didn't agree, then it was fine. He had already found enough disciples from the nearby earthly stars of Yuliangism. These people were the people that Yuliangism had cultivated for thousands of years. Starting from their ancestors, every generation was nourished by rich spiritual opportunity. Compared to the people of the outside world, they were born with extraordinary aptitude. Most of the direct descendants of Yuliangism were also selected from them. With these people, even if they retreated to the barbarian heaven region, there was still hope for the devil sect to rise in the future. At this time, Bei Xiangtong, who had been silent for a long time, finally spoke. "Wanderer wishes to serve the people of the 9 continents. This is a good wish, but how can we be sure that they will accept me?" Wanderer Rao said, "Taoist friend should know that the people who besieged Kongying that day, other than the cultivators of the 9 continents, there were also 2 imperial emperors who were originally imprisoned by Kongying. If the cultivators of the 9 continents can accept the 2 of them, why can't they accept us?" Bei Xiangtong shook his head. This reason couldn't convince him. He said, "At that time, the cultivators of the 9 continents needed the 2 of them to deal with Kongying, so they could accept them. But now, they might not need us. Besides, the 2 of them died in battle. Who knows if the 9 continents will burn the bridge after crossing it? He didn't think that the death of the two people was the doing of the cultivators of the 9 continents, but after all, he didn't know the latter at all, so he didn't feel at ease. Unfettered Rao said, "Well, if the cultivators of the 9 continents come again, what are the chances of my great dust realm winning?" Bei Xiangtong did not flatter himself, but stated his judgment truthfully. Back then, when Sect Master Kong was still alive, he could suppress all the heavens. If the cultivators of the 9 continents could kill Sect Master Kong, then there must be someone who can contend against Sect Master Kong. With such an opponent, our chances of winning are not high. Cultivator Rao said, "Yang Chuan is the most accomplished person in the realm now, but no matter how you look at it, he can't compare to your sect leader. Just the two of us don't trust him. If the two of us go to war again, how many people can he gather? Our side will lose without a doubt." Since he knew this, why didn't he make a choice earlier? No matter how bad the result is, it can't be that bad. He didn't have the idea of joining the 9 continents for no reason. Yang Chuan and Kong Ying worked together to kill the old dragon. Although he and Dragon Monarch were no longer the same person, it wasn't that he didn't have a knot in his heart, so he naturally wouldn't join the Qi accumulation palace again. Bei Xiangtong thought about it seriously for a while, then said, "All right, I promise you. Even though I still have doubts in my heart, there is no better choice in front of me." Unfettered Rao heard this and was slightly happy. But no matter what happened in the future, having an ally now was always beneficial to him. He immediately made an oath of alliance with Bei Xiangtong in the divine will, then he said, "I'll come to you now." Bei Xiangtong said, "I've set up a formation outside of Zhongtian these few years, you can go there and come to me before Jiang Can and the others." Unfettered Rao was a little surprised, "So you've already set it up?" Setting up a formation was not an easy task, not to mention doing it in a remote heaven without being noticed. He unconsciously thought more highly of this ally. Bei Xiangtong said, "Just in case." This array formation had actually been set up by the Jade Liang order a long time ago. It was an ancient array formation, but it could only transport 2 or 3 people at a time. After Kong Ying became the supreme headmaster, it was abandoned and was not known to the outside world. It was only after he read through the scrolls that he found out about the existence of such an array formation. He ordered people to rebuild it, and he did not expect it to be put to good use now. After Unfettered Rao asked about the location of the formation, he left the divine will and called Sima Quan and Deng Zhenjuan over. After reminding them, he left the Zhongtian region and found the formation according to Bei Xiangtong's words. 10 days later, they arrived at the left heaven region. Bei Xiangtong was already waiting here. The two discussed for a long time and decided to each guard a formation. Then, they waited for their opponents to come. Soon, a month passed and the 3 from Qi Accumulation Palace arrived at the left heaven region. They immediately sensed 2 powerful Qi dynamics in the heaven region. Jiang Can sensed for a moment and said coldly, "It's Rao Jifeng." Unfettered Rao had been under the Qi Accumulation Palace for a period of time. There were only a few emperors in Jun Chen world, so he recognized them immediately. Shang Zhou's face tightened. If this person is here, would the Gong brothers be here too? Rumor had it that the disappearance of the Gong brothers was related to Unfettered Rao. Since this person appeared, would the 2 brothers appear too? Duan Su said, "Great Imperial Enforcer, should we retreat or attack?" Jiang Can said coldly, "Since we're here, how can we retreat without fighting? Charge in." He had the highest status among the 3. Since he made the decision, Shang and Duan could only follow. They activated the carriage and charged into the heaven region ahead. About 100 days later, the dual realms dial in front of Yang Chuan suddenly moved. He immediately came out of his meditation and pointed at it. Spiritual light shone from the dial, and Shang Zhou's figure appeared. He bowed deeply to Yang Chuan and said, "Palace Master." Yang Chuan said solemnly, "Did you encounter any difficulties?" Shang Zhou lowered his head and said, "The 3 of us went to the left heaven region on the orders of Palace Master. Everything went smoothly, but someone helped Bei Xiangtong halfway and caused the mission to fail. Please punish us, Palace Master." Yang Chuan's expression darkened. "Who was that?" Shang Zhou said, it's unfettered Rao who was once a guest of Qi Accumulation Palace. Yang Chuan frowned. Rao Jifeng. I know how capable this person is. Even with his help, Bei Xiangtong, the three of you should have been able to take him down. Is there any other reason? Shang Zhou said, unfettered Rao's cultivation has improved greatly. This person has a lot of treasures with him. We can sense that he still has powerful killing moves that he hasn't used yet. We are also wary of the Gong brothers hiding nearby, so we don't dare to use some of our moves. Yang Chuan thought for a moment and said, your considerations are not without reason. You are all my backbone, you can't take risks. Never mind, since we can't take the left heaven region this time, there's no need to force an attack. Just guard the middle heaven region. I will personally deal with this matter later. The cultivators of the 9 continents would arrive in a few years. Now, every imperial emperor of Qi Accumulation Palace was extremely important. They couldn't afford any losses. He was conservative by nature. If it wasn't for this great opportunity, he wouldn't have sent the 3 of them out. Now that he felt that the other side might threaten Qi Accumulation Palace, he decided to deal with it himself. Shang Zhou said, yes, I will wait for Palace Master Jing Ho in the Middle Heaven region. Yang Chuan waved his sleeves and dispersed the light. Under the threat of the cultivators of the 9 continents, he felt that he couldn't waste any more time. He had to resolve this matter as soon as possible, so he immediately ordered the palace attendants to send people. Just 2 hours later, a huge palace flew out from the palace, turned into a grand light, and flew towards a red formation path in the sky. In the Tianyuan region, Zhang Yi, who was cultivating in the temple, suddenly felt a surge of spiritual opportunity between heaven and earth. His expression changed, and he soared into the sky to take a look. When he saw ripples on the red cloud, he knew that someone must have used the formation Dao. He thought for a moment and landed back in the palace. He immediately sent out a few letters, and not long after, a reply came. Yang Chuan was now an emissary of the Qi Accumulation Palace's main heaven, and had sought refuge under the tutelage of a powerful true lord. Because he was a true disciple, he was able to come into contact with some of the palace's secrets. Because Yang Chuan did not try to conceal his identity, he was easily found out. He thought to himself, Yang Chuan left in a hurry, something big must have happened. There was only one formation path now, and it led to the Middle Heaven region of Yuliangism, so he was sure that Yang Chuan went there. Previously, Sima Quan had told him that if Yang Chuan were to enter the palace, he must find a way to inform them. Thus, he found an excuse to leave the Earth star and arrived on a floating meteorite. He took out the two-realm dial and prepared to inform them of this matter. However, he found that the light on the dial flickered and dissipated. It was the same even after a few attempts. He immediately understood that the other side didn't have enough spiritual opportunity to communicate. He thought about it, this method didn't work, so he could only make Sima Quan come find him. His body flashed and turned into a beam of light, returning to the Earth star and leaving behind the mark of the Xian Yin Heavenly Palace. One day, Sima Quan's avatar would find him. Zhang Yi invited him into the secret room and invited him to sit. He said, Jinren Sima, Yang Chuan has already left for the Middle Heaven domain. Jinren's two-realm dial doesn't seem to have enough spirit and can't transmit messages. I could only find you like this. The clone said with a serious expression, last time, 3 imperial emperors from the Qi Accumulation Palace went to the Middle Heaven region. This time, Yang Chuan is going too. I think there must be something big going on. I need to report this to my true self, but I'm afraid I won't be able to make it in time. Is it possible to borrow the formation path? Zhang Yi shook his head. At times like this, not everyone can use formation path unless Jinren is a perfected emperor. Just now, we can make an exception. Now that the imperial emperors aren't here, I believe it won't be hard for Jinren to do this. Sima Quan shook his head, this place isn't like other places. Every perfected emperor has a talisman that Yang Chuan taught them to protect themselves. The last time I moved, I was almost discovered. Zhang Yi asked, does Jinren Sima have any other ideas? Sima Quan pondered for a moment, then raised his head and said, "There is a way. Sage Shang can activate the two realms dial consecutively. If that clone of mine sees it, he will definitely know that something urgent has happened and will send his clone through the formation path to come here. In this way, we can quickly send the news out and let him bring it back."